Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in to Knowing Stuff is Tight this week. I was joined by my close friend Chase to discuss the culture of Brazil, talk about how it compares to living in the US. We both spent 2 years there as missionaries and wanted to share our experience. So sit back and relax with a glass of guarana, caipirinha, cachaça, or just go with coffee. Breathe in the warm Brazilian air with me, and as they say, fique à vontade.
Porque estou tão sozinho. Porque tudo é tão triste. Beleza que existe. A beleza que não é só minha, que também passa sozinha.
Se ela soubesse que quando ela passa, o mundo inteirinho se enche de graça e fica mais lindo por causa do amor.
It's an interesting thing. Brazilian culture versus our own.
Yeah. Like one of the main differences I noticed was just the difference between individualism and collectivism there. And Lucia mentioned this when she first came here. It's just it feels like people just want to be left alone.
I feel like there's
in the US.
In the US, there's a lot of determination as far as like my personal growth.
There is like the might of the individual.
Yeah,
like you can make it on your own.
I just need to do my own thing. I just need to figure it out. Mm-hmm. I'll get my promotion. I'll get my more money. I'll sell my new product that I want to get out on the market.
Yeah, it's just a lot of like.
Whereas in Brazil, I think it's because of certain harsh conditions that just kind of force you to like, you got to kind of look out for each other. Mm-hmm. There's certain things that I think family and friendships turn into something in Brazil where it's like, we got to look out for each other. I'll always be here to help you. But at the same time, I'm not going to lie, but there's this little bit of underlying like, what can I do to step over you? Like, there's a little bit of that. I'm not going to lie. That's very prevalent as well in Brazil as far as like, what can I put you in a position of that will give me a better position? Like, there is a lot of that.
Yeah, man, the Northeast sounds so harsh.
It's a little rough.
I'm trying to think if I saw that.
Well, and I think there's a bit of a difference because I think I have spent probably more time in Brazil not being a missionary than you have.
Yeah, definitely.
And so there's a little bit of a different perspective of being able to see some things. Because I want to say that when I came back from my mission, I remember hating America.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to lie. I came back from living 2 years in Brazil and thought, what is this country I'm coming back to? Everyone just cares about themselves. There's no, like, sense of just, like, the general good. Right. And I just came from this place where everyone loved each other. And no one wanted to do it, like, but the reality of it is...
But you were experiencing Mormonism in Brazil.
Right.
Right? For the most part.
And I was experiencing the feeling of the culture, not the reality. There is a difference. And part of that is coming and saying, there's a bit of the Brazilian that has that culture, that is there to do that, but there's also like a part of that self-betterment that wants to try to get an edge on the other. And so whatever you can find out by being so nice to someone, whatever you can find out that gives you an edge, you can use that. Like, there's a bit of that. And I don't really think many people can deny that part, but that's there.
Yeah.
But you do get an initial feel of very sincere kindness that I think Americans just get to the point where like, whatever. It is what it is. I'm just trying to get myself figured out here. Like I think there's a part of that's I think Brazilians might just still be exercising that general kindness, which we also had. Like if you look back, like in our history, even though someone was a complete jerk to someone else, like they did it in like a kind manner. Like, excuse me, sir. You know, there's like that
like passive aggressiveness.
There's that proper of being. You have this duty of being proper and nice, but your real intentions aren't quite there. Like I think, and that's where we were at years back in our history. Like if you look back at our history, you had this duty to be polite. Yet that's not where you were really going.
We're wanting. I mean, like there to get
lots of gossip
into the church
between like all the women in the background, like the men in the background. Sure. You've got that gossip between neighbors. You know, being better than the Joneses, like all that kind of stuff. That's very prevalent in Brazil. But it's like you do it with like a smile, like. And I think in America we've gotten to the point where we're just like, I don't care about smiling at you. Like, I'm just gonna figure out
ready to be more real.
I'm just gonna figure out a step on you to get over, and I don't care if you notice that or not. Like, I think that's just the difference. Is like I feel like in 50, 60 years time, Brazil's gonna be very much similar to where we're at right now, as far as that social structure.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so there's visual arts, cinema, and theater. Cinema and theater, not cinnamon theater, although that sounds delicious. And there's City of God, which you've probably seen, right? Cidade de Deus?
Maybe.
Oh, you haven't seen it?
I'm not.
You would know.
Super familiar about that. You might explain it to me.
So it's like the movie that. So IMDb has his top 250 list, and it's in there. It's like near 100. And it's in Rio, and it's a crime story of like the favelas in Brazil. Oh man! Well, we gotta watch that.
I feel like there's a small like little memory fragment of that makes sense to me.
It's one of the movies that starts with a guy running, this guy running down the street, and does a record scratch, and he's like, "Oh, you're probably wondering how I got here."
Nope, I haven't watched that.
Okay, I don't know if that's where the meme is from, but that's in that movie. Okay, so that's one of the most prestigious movies that's come out of Brazil. And then there's music. We know about the music there. There's like 4 or 5 main genres, right, that we can talk about.
Yeah,
we'll get there. Dances, which kind of goes along with the music.
Yep.
And then there's popular culture. So I wanted to talk about some of the main celebrities that come from Brazil.
Yeah.
Not Cristiano Ronaldo. He's Portuguese. Did you know that?
Is he really Portuguese?
Everybody thinks he's from Brazil.
That's funny.
And there's this hilarious YouTube video of him in Japan and them singing this Brazilian song. And he's like, "Welcome from Brazil. Like, we love Brazil." And he was just very awkwardly nodding his head the whole time.
That's really funny considering the prejudice that Portuguese have against Brazil. Like, that's got to be like a step down from him thinking that everyone thinks he's from Brazil.
Yeah, but it's confusing because there's Ronaldinho, which is little Ronaldo.
Yeah.
Which is not Cristiano Ronaldo. Anyways, we'll talk about that.
Well, I mean, they have a bust made of him in the São Paulo airport, isn't it? Like,
is it?
Yeah. It's
the horrible one with the
Rio
teeth?
Airport or something like that. Yeah, the really bad one.
Yeah.
But they've, like, like done homage to him in Brazil.
Yeah, so like, he's an amazing player, but...
Did he not play on the...
Isn't that weird?
Did he not play on the Seleção?
Maybe that's why it's
Brazil?
Confusing. Well,
because if he played on the Seleção Brazil, like, that's got to be something wrong with that.
Yeah, I can see where the confusion can come from. And then family and social class. This is a pretty big subject. We'll get there. Because I was in pretty poor areas and very rich areas as well. Did you get a mix of that?
Yeah, I got a mix of that.
So, like, history of Brazil. Like, my understanding, so Pedro Cabral is his name. He's like the Christopher Columbus of Brazil. Founded somewhere around the 1500s. He's a Portuguese explorer. Colonized Brazil. Brought a bunch of African slaves. And they named it because of the Brazil nuts.
Except...
Confirmed fact.
Are we saying that's a confirmed fact?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we talked about the Brazil tree, right?
Yeah, and that's what it's named after.
But
The Brazil nuts that grow on the Brazil tree.
They don't grow on the Brazil tree.
The Brazil bush?
No.
Is what they grow on?
In Portuguese, you've got castanha do Pará, which is going to be Brazil nuts, which is the nuts of Pará, which is not Brazil nut. Brazil nut, I'm sure, has got to be coming from something about it being exported from Brazil. It's been called the Brazil nut. Whereas what we're saying, Brazil was named after the
All right, it's the Brazil wood tree.
Pau do Brasil.
You're right, it's the tree.
Brazil wood tree.
All right.
So, I'm honestly not going to have much to say about the history of Brazil because I'm actually very vague on the history of Brazil. I know a little bit of the history of like the northeast area, which I lived, which is where I lived.
You lived there for 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I lived there for 2 years, serving my mission between 2009 and 2011. That area was actually colonized by and this is where it's going to get weird because of the translation between Portuguese and English, but os Hollandeses, which I believe
Dutch.
is from, Dutch is what we would say in English, and not the Hollands.
The Hollandians?
The people from Holland.
No, my family, I have family history going back to the Dutch.
Right, and so they was colonized by the Dutch and then later taken over by the Portuguese. So the Dutch actually produced a lot of the road systems and bridge systems in the northeast area, which I was from. So you can see a little bit of their architecture there. And then it was actually defeated by the Portuguese, so lots of areas burned and that kind of stuff. So they've got some history of war in that area from when the Portuguese took over. Yeah. And then
well, from what I've read, so most of the big cities were, like most of the areas that I was in, there was a church in the centro, the center of the town. There's a church there, and then the city is built around that church.
Yep.
And it's very European style. So it's just, in most parts of Brazil, it's just European style houses. The closer you get to the Amazon, the less of that you see.
Okay.
And just like the Dutch settled the northeast, the Germans settled the south. And there are some states in Brazil that are primarily African because of the slaves that were brought over there. Their culture is very African. So what's beautiful and complex about Brazil is it's one of the most diverse nations in the world.
Yeah.
So they have this Portuguese influence mixed with all these Amazon tribes and African culture mixed with Germans and all these other Europeans. And it also has the largest Japanese population outside of Japan.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, so it has all these different cultures, and it's beautiful and complicated at the same time. And where we were living, so my mission was in Campinas, which is São Paulo, so it's the commerce center.
Yeah.
And generally those areas, you could say it's similar to New York, where it's where all the money is made, and you have a huge diversity of people.
Yeah.
And what's incredibly naive when I first went there with 19 years, as they say in Portuguese, 19 years old, I thought, so this place is so diverse and everybody's intermingling with each other. They have all these mixed races. There's probably no racism because everybody's so mixed together. How could you be racist if everybody is just you're all sharing genetic code with each other? Yeah. And then way after I came back home, when my wife was telling me about this, the racism is almost the exact same as it is in the U.S. Yeah, where the darker, and it's just skin tone. It's just skin tone because you'll have these families that you'll have some light-skinned children and some really dark-skinned children from the same parents because it's so intermixed. And it's more difficult for a darker skin tone to get employment, to raise up in social status, to get into certain types of schools, and they're treated more harshly by the police and the legal system.
And that's different.
I'm that sounds like the U.S.
That's very similar. That's different from what I've experienced because my experience was that there's more regionalized racism, meaning more from the south. Because I served up in the northeast, there's more people just from the south
either Rio Grande do Sul or like São Paulo, where it's like if you were from the Northeast, it doesn't matter your color. You're from the Northeast. True. They're like regionalism against you. I don't know. Like
Yeah. Well,
if you were to say like someone from the Southeast, like Georgia would be.
It's like a regional rivalry, right?
Yeah, because you could tell by their accent that they're from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, now they're dumber. Now they're not as intelligent. Now
Yeah.
they're not deserving that kind of stuff. Because they do have a very distinct, different dialect and way to speak.
That's interesting. Yeah, and I want to be fair with these comparisons because we're going to be comparing Brazil to the U.S. right now. So like a U.S. audience can have something to compare to Brazil, and it's the same way that white people on the East or the West Coast talk about people from the South. You know, like it's characterized in a lower class way. Whereas what's funny about like Brazil is just the opposite. Where like the southern part of Brazil is the upper class, higher, better education, and they talk down to the northern part of Brazil. And what's funny is like you're right. It doesn't really come down to skin color in that comparison. Like the skin color still plays a part in it. But it's also just like where you're from, like where you're born, like that matters. So I learned that I was wrong. I was just like an idealistic 19-year-old, like, oh, like what if you had this country where everybody was just intermingled with each other and then racism just didn't make sense? Like it just doesn't make, it's not a logical thing.
Coming in as like a very religious standpoint, and it's into something that you haven't grown up with, so you're not like aware of little changes in their economy and their people and all that
right.
Stuff. When you grow up in the United States, you kind of realize and understand some of those things just as the nature of like you've grown up in it.
Yeah.
Where you go to another country now, all of a sudden it's almost romanticized in a way.
Right.
Like, I live in a tropical paradise, and everyone loves everything.
Yeah, and you show up there with, I don't know if I'm using this term correctly, but it's like a Zionist perspective, where it's like you're going to this area where you've been chosen to, like in a sense, you're like saving. Yeah. You're like saving them. Yeah. Like in a spiritual and like a literal sense.
Right. That is definitely
yeah, that's peak naivety.
Lens of like everyone's God's children through above everything. So I think it does soften the blow on a lot of those things.
Yeah. But that just like makes the progress that much more meaningful. And it's cool to see the race relations in the US as for a lot of people the only thing that they understand, and how in a country on the opposite side of the world there are a lot of similarities. And like to me it's just as nonsensical. You know, like you're all just people. You don't choose where you're born or how you look like.
It's kind of nice to know that you're fighting something bigger than what you're just locally experiencing.
True. Oh, and I just saw I saw this video today on how blacks are just treated in Brazil, and they have Black Lives Matter marches in Brazil, and that opened up my eyes, because Black Lives Matter, whether you like agree with the position or not, they're talked about and treated like terrorist organization, and when you see this in another country, it's like, okay, so this is bigger than just the U.S. This isn't just a U.S. phenomenon. Yeah,
like I think that sometimes makes it. I don't want to say that I think anything's the way that those people have been, the way that blacks have been treated in past and current history is like acceptable. I don't want that to be that way. Mm-hmm. But sometimes being able to see that it's bigger than just the way your country treats you, that it's happening in other places of the world, makes it a little bit better to understand. It's like we're not just fighting because our country sees us as we're fighting an actual. This is.
It's a global issue, right? It's a human issue. Yeah. It's nice to know that America's not this outlier. Like America is this harsh, aggressive outlier in race.
When you look at it, sometimes you can see why is this still an issue, and it's a little bit better of an explanation to know that we're fighting a genetic, like humanity problem, rather than just an American issue.
Right.
It's not just an American problem; it's a worldwide problem.
Yeah.
And obviously some places are better than others. But it makes it better to understand that it's more of just like we're trying to change the essence of humanity because over the whole world and entirely over the history, this has been the way it is. We're trying to overcome.
Right. Like the in-group, out-group tribalist mindset is so strong because that's been around for longer than like we've had books, right? And the longer that we've been able to like record things and like record interactions with outside tribes, and that is part of like your genetics in fearing something that you think is going to be dangerous to you because for a very, very long time, a person that looked different from you would very likely just kill you.
Right.
You know?
There was some very much instinctual differences, like, you know, instincts that your genetics would kick in and put you in a defensive situation.
Yeah. And that's implicit. Like a lot of, like, if you ask a lot of people, they'll say, no, I'm not racist. And they are, you know, doing their best to not be racist, but you can't control your implicit biases. And so when police are put into this very intense situation where they're fearing for their life, and the opposite party is as well, that's when you see this violence and these shootings, because it takes them back to like their primitive mind, where it's fight or flight.
So there is like some. Not to say that it's ever correct or the reason why it's taken this long has ever been justified, but there is some solace in knowing that we're fighting something bigger than just our country, just the Americans are the only people that have this problem. Knowing that it's humanitarian.
Yeah, there's like a sense of solidarity in knowing that, like everybody's trying to figure this out. And the fact that we were talking about this, like people are just talking about itself is like a huge sign of progress.
Well, and just the fact that like, if you want to think about it in something completely different, not talking about humanity, human science or anything like that, just take it as a math problem. If you get a math problem wrong, if it's 2 + 2, you're gonna feel like an idiot that you got it wrong. But if it's some huge long quadratic equation things going on and you get it wrong, it's like at least it was a hard problem that I got wrong. Like it's a hard problem.
Yeah.
Not saying that there's justification reason as to why it's taken this long, but there is a little bit of knowing. It's like, okay, well, at least we're trying to tackle something that's bigger than normal. Like, race is a big issue, and it's gonna take time, and we are doing the best we can. I think that's the part to take down. It's like we are trying to do the best we can. I think obviously some people are. There's gonna be some outliers that are gonna have more of an issue than others, but.
But it's moving super quickly, too. Like the math problem is being solved at light speed compared, right?
I remember like 3 things in a row this time. So.
Oh man, so there's that. So like the race issues that we have in the U.S. are not that different from what they are in Brazil, and this is a very tough topic to talk about as white males, because we have, we are just much less likely to encounter the racism that we would find if we went to another country and were the minorities. But
I think me growing up from Idaho, you growing up in Utah, there's not as much racism here as there is in other parts of the country.
Because it's not as diverse.
It
just isn't.
Like, it's true, it's not as diverse.
I maybe had 3 black kids in my high school.
Encounters, or we had, albeit I'll say, a handful of black people in my high school growing up. Some of those were my best friends. Like we didn't have it didn't matter that they were darker skinned. It didn't matter. And that's just been the way that I figured everyone looked at it growing up. I didn't even know. And then as I moved down here to Utah, I met some people that had moved up here from the southeast. And the more that we talked, it was like, oh, that's actually a real thing. People still do that today. Like I had no idea coming into it. So it was almost like having that real experience with someone who's actually experienced that. So it's very much, I think, dependent on where you grow up, whether you realize it. And I think that can be some of the problems sometimes when you're trying to address it over an entire nation. Is that people that grow up in areas that don't really have that as a problem are going to think it's bull.
It's not an actual,
Like, I think people in Idaho are gonna think, why is there a Black Lives Matter man? Like, I've never looked at a black person and ever thought they're lesser than me.
Right.
You know, I've never seen that happen here or there, or you know, any place where maybe the racism isn't as rooted as it is in other places in the country. So I think there's a lot that can happen that can be counterproductive because people don't get on board. Because for them in their specific area, they don't see it.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen as often. And so they think it's a lie. And I think that people can be persuaded into believing that.
Yeah, that's a tough one because that puts so much responsibility on the news media to,
which is unfortunate.
Which right? Like it's not up to the not up to the task. Well, that's Well, that's enough race for now. I say privilegedly.
Well, we did get a little off topic.
So that's history of Brazil, and then the language. So the language is, in fact, Portuguese.
Language? Portuguese.
And we were talking about, so my area, so in Campinas is the state of São Paulo, which is in the southeast part of Brazil. Chase was in the northeast part. And they have differences in dialect, just like you'd see in the U.S. And they have their own slang. And so Chase will say a lot of these words that make no sense. And so what I read earlier is
regional dialect and slang. I mean, I think it's the same way you can just think about like someone in Boston's going to say something that I'm not going to understand at all. Idaho.
Yes. So you get that exact same thing in Brazil. Does that make sense? And it's a country that geographically is about the same size as the U.S.
Yeah, it's very close.
So I think it is the seventh largest, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I think like the United States is like the third largest.
Anyways, who cares about that?
Yeah. Very comparable, different in population.
Yeah.
You know, we're over 300 million. They're about 180 million.
Yeah, population is smaller. But as far as the language goes, Portuguese is very similar to Spanish. So when Lucy and I are out in public speaking Spanish, or when we're speaking Portuguese, and we're like at the doctor's or something, sometimes the nurse will start speaking Spanish with us.
Right.
And we have like nod our head and kind of go along. Because in Utah, the majority population is white, Caucasian, and then next is Mexican. Or Hispanic, and it didn't like mostly Mexican, right?
A slightly darker complexion,
right?
And speaks a foreign language.
And so, yeah, their mind just goes to Spanish.
Latin-based language. One of the things that I've heard from people, like when they hear Portuguese, they have no idea what it is. They say that it sounds like Spanish with either marbles in your mouth, or Spanish with like a French flair on it. Like there's like these little things. So it's very close to Spanish.
Yeah, I would just describe Portuguese as like a little more smooth and flows better, whereas Spanish seems to have like more hard sounds, maybe.
So there's the hierarchy of hierarchy of Romantic languages, which is Romanian, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Spanish. And so, basically what that's going off of is that from one a higher language in that hierarchy is going to be able to understand a language below it easier than a language below it can understand the language above it. And I get that more from my cousin, who is a linguist major, and she kind of was the one that let me know about that. And we had a friend in common that he served his mission in Romania, and he listened to us speak Portuguese together, and he was able to pick out a few words. Like, obviously, I think from Romania down to Portuguese, Romania, French, Italian, Portuguese, there's quite a few steps there, so it's understandable that not everything would be understood. But there was he was able to pick up some of those things just off of the root Latin words that we would use in Portuguese. Whereas having friends who spoke Spanish, or more trying to speak to native Spanish speakers who didn't know much of English. So this is kind of, I've got my theory on it and I'll kind of explain it later, but Spanish trying to go to Portuguese is difficult because trying to be a native Spanish speaker listening to Portuguese, it doesn't quite make sense. But yet, being me as a person who speaks Spanish or who speaks Portuguese, it's easier for me to understand Spanish. Whether I don't understand everything. I'm not going to say I understand everything, but there's a lot of coincidences that kind of come in hand that I'm able to understand. My theory on that is that hierarchy is correct as long as there's not like a common language that's also understood. Because someone who speaks Spanish and English versus me who speaks English and Portuguese as well, when we try to speak Portuguese and Spanish to each other, there's a greater comprehension on both sides. So the person who speaks Spanish is able to understand lots of the Portuguese because they've also learned English. And so like there's like this communal part of having a second language learn, that once you learn an additional language to your native language, you start to understand the structures of language, the way that they work, and it makes it easier to, I guess, fill in the blanks.
Yeah, I think like once you learn the second language, it opens your mind to, you're basically opening up different pathways.
Yeah.
In how to like follow a thought or like follow an idea. And then once you add the third one in, you've triangulated the lingual flow.
Yeah, I definitely have heard that it's easier that
the third language is easier to learn than the second one because you've already
and then subsequently
kicked
more
the door open.
So as you learn more and more languages, because you start to build this like structure of language in its pure form, whether that's whatever language it is. There's just a basic structure that there is in language that you're able to pull from, and if you can understand that, it's just filling in the blanks with the vocabulary words, you know, because you and me, we're both fluent in English and Portuguese. I just now have more vocabulary. It's not, I don't feel like I have this thing of like, oh, I speak a completely different language. No, I just have more ways to say the same thing. Earlier we were speaking tonight and I said something epoca, like just in the middle, you know, like a very,
which means like a time period.
A time period.
Like there's the word epic like in English.
Neanderthal epoca. You know, I was like, I just threw it in there, and it's just because I have a different word to use, and that one came up first. You know, it's like if you have more words to say, close the door, you might say close the porta, close the door, close. You know, you've just got different ways to say it.
And what's notable about that is this learning the second language thing is learning a different way to think. That just sounds like an analog of just hearing a completely different point of view than you've had growing up. And once you've gotten to a point where, I mean, you have to approach it with a level of humility that you've been proven wrong, like something that you believed very strongly about, whatever it is. Once you're proved wrong that first time and you accept it and you think, okay, I was wrong about this, so now what else can I learn? So when you learn your second language, it's like, oh, the way that I was taught this one way that I could think of how to form a sentence.
Like, I don't
you
care
have
if
a new way to do that.
That's called a pineapple, but we call it an abacaxi. I don't know what you were taught growing up, and so
isn't
you just
abacaxi fun to say?
Yeah. So abacaxi, it's very much. I think it does. I think it helps a lot with opening someone's mind when they learn a second language, to being able to be more accepting of other people's ideas of things, because we can see that someone else lived their entire life knowing that same object as something completely different. I grew up learning that it was a pineapple. They grew up learning that it was an abacaxi. You know, and that seems really simple on language side, but I think it does open up kind of a pathway in those other areas as well. As long as it's not being constantly shut down.
That is a way to just open the mind and just make yourself more receptive to ideas that are unfamiliar, uncomfortable, and process them. Yep. But that leads into the next topic. These two kind of things are intermingled in Brazil, and that's the language and also the religion. So I was just thinking about how many expressions there are in Brazil that are Catholic based. And they say "Ai meu Deus," or they say "Vai com Deus," which is like "go with God," or "Fique com Deus," "be with God."
Yeah, if you really thought about that,
and they say "benção." People just say "benção." They just say "blessing."
Yeah,
when you leave.
If you really thought about that translation, think about like someone now, today, current history.
To say that in the U.S., to say, "Hey, go with God, my friend," you think you're just talking to like an old
Or talk
traditionalists.
Talk to your friend, and be like, I really hope that I can get like this new job.
And they say,
like, if it's
God's
willing,
will. If it's God's will. They say, si Dios quiere. If God wants it.
If God's will. Like, I would look at that person and be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, even coming from like growing up in a religious structure, that seems weird to bring that up as often as it is in Brazil. It's a very common thing.
With how weird it is, it's totally harmless too.
Oh yeah, no, it's totally harmless. And I think the thing that's funny is like we see it in our old speak. So like in our older language of English, we see Godspeed, those types of things. It's something that's there in our history. Yeah. But it's just we're not saying that anymore. They just still are.
Well, and how many houses did you go into? Well, also there's just like bumper stickers on cars. It's Deus Fiel.
Yep, God is
like
faithful.
Whoever came up with that is clearly a millionaire.
Yeah.
Like that, it's just fascinating to me how
much God perceives,
just how inculcated they are into the culture of.
Yeah, there's very much a stronger presence of God in the language. Like, and I think it's interesting because they have the same 10 commandments that American Catholics have, which is don't take the Lord's name in vain. That was always a weird thing for me because, we tend to restrict
in Mormonism,
how many times.
It's very, very careful. They're very, very careful about how you use the word God. Yeah.
Very careful about how you use the name of God. You don't say it unless, it's in some sort of prayer or I guess Scripture read.
But I wonder that, like, with how much they use it, I wonder if they are using it.
It could be
in a faithful way, whatever the opposite of the word vain is.
It's
like
in
they're
a
using
way,
it in
like go with God. It's a blessing. It's a type of just.
It's like keeping God more present, like He's closer.
Yeah, like it's almost you familiarize yourself. Yeah, that's an interesting part to think about. But it is interesting to think that we even had that in our history of English. That was like that wouldn't be a weird thing to think if you were thinking 18th century, 1700s. Someone to say, "Oh, Godspeed."
Let's say, "God be with you."
God be with you. Like that would be very common, I feel. But for us today, we very much have kind of excluded that to being kind of almost the weird. And so we just kind of don't say that. We just say good luck.
They say "Pelo amor de Deus" a lot too.
Pelo amor de Deus. Yeah. Yeah.
which means for the love of God.
Well, and you know what? Maybe something that we use quite a bit. For the love of God. Jesus. It's like,
but it's just like there's no bite. Like there's a real bite to it in English. Like for me growing up, like there's such a harsh bite to that. But there, it's so.
I'll say the same thing though.
What do you think?
I don't think like there is a bite to it in English, but in the same way. I mean, have you ever heard someone swear in Portuguese? You don't think anything of it. Because swear
That's
words,
a big deal, huh?
Swear words in Portuguese for us,
they're hilarious. Like the first time that I heard bosta, and this is a regional thing too. Like merda is like you get gasps, and then bosta. Okay. But that's a regional. Like I've heard it's different.
Shit. Yeah,
it's different depending on this like the state that you're in.
Well, okay, I'll give you this. My northeastern state of where I was at, Pernambuco. I've had people tell me that I couldn't say the word porcaria, which is just like, that's such crap.
That's like nonsense.
It's like, that's nonsense. It's something very simple, yet other people say it's like, well, that's better to say than bosta. Like, aqui bosta or aqui porcaria. Porcaria so would be like it's like someone says, shit. And it's like, okay, no, I'm not going to say that. I say, crap. So someone
gives a more gentle version of poop.
So it's a gentle word. That's what I thought porcaria was. So I said that on my mission, and someone was like, "Oh, elder, you can't say that."
But
That's
I have a grandma or great grandma that thought like the word bugger was a swear word.
Right. So I think it's funny because when you learn a second language, a swear word becomes exactly what it is. It's just an additional word. It's an additional word for exclamation. That's used, and so we don't have that weight to it.
Yeah.
So I think we can see people maybe using God or whatever as a lightweight. Although, you know what? Everyone does it. So I don't think that's... Like, I have never heard anyone come in like, you can't say the name of God in vain. Like, I've never had that once happen. I've had that happen
Brazil.
For porcaria, but
like, they'll say
God.
it over the pulpit. Like Like the bishop or the Relief Society president will say, "I meu Deus."
I know this.
Right?
Yeah, that's true.
It's not a big deal.
So, I mean, it's not. Interesting part, we talked about language and we went to religion. I'm going to go back just a little bit to religion. It's the funny thing that we have about assigning swear words extra meaning when really all they are is additional words. I feel like that's something worth saying.
They're kind of fillers, huh?
It's just a filler word.
They're just taking up space.
I think the same way that someone might say the F word or someone might say freak, depending on how you say it, I think it can have the same meaning. Like if someone says the F word very subtly in a sentence, I don't know, this effing thing, this effing thing. And then you've got someone who yells the word, freak.
For me,
like
it's so much more about intent.
That meaning is so much more harsh than the meaning of the other person. Yet we've assigned that one specific word such a drastic weight to it that it hurts some people when they hear it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's too bad. And that's going away. Like, I was thinking about this, like, yesterday, that the F word is, like, so played out. Like, it's been used so much. Like, it used to be... Because, like, every HBO show... Like, most HBO shows will put it in as much as they possibly can because it's hard and edgy to make something feel adult and mature. But when every 13-year-old, like, every high school student uses it...
Right.
It's not... You need to get more creative. You got to think of something more...
I want to say when I was growing up, a PG-13 could...
You get one.
You had one F word. If there was ever more than one F word, it would move up to the R rating. R. So it's funny though, but yeah,
because the children's ears need time.
You'll hear recuperate. Right. They can hear one, but that's it.
They gotta space it out. If it's a 2-hour movie,
but you know what? Like you're right. Like there is you've got a larger base of adolescents using those swear words. I think it would be interesting to see what will happen in 50 years' time. Because will those swear words actually be swear words, or will we have invented new words to become the swear words?
The swear words are based on whatever's taboo at the time.
Right.
So
what does it matter?
But I like we can say in 50 years, like swear words are going to be like litter, or like pollution,
right?
Or gas-powered vehicles.
You could make
those are things that are taboo.
You could make a word that's just like you don't talk about that. You don't say that. And that would then become a word that would then, again, as most swear words have been, because as I see it, most swear words are used as exclamatory words. They don't actually have some of them,
they don't stand on their own.
They have their own meaning in a way, but they're used mostly as exclamatory words. So what word in the future is going to be the exclamatory word that we can't use, that then we make up side words that are okay to exclaim with, but aren't swear words.
Yeah.
We can go back to religion.
Okay, so one of the most remarkable things about the religion in Brazil is not just how much people talk about God in their day-to-day, but most of the houses you go into, there's Catholic imagery. Yeah. Most houses, there's the Mother Mary thing. That's this.
Yep, the images or the candles.
Dress.
Very
lady,
very
and
present.
then they've got there's a particular term for this, but it's the picture of Jesus where his hand is up by his head, and there's another one down by his waist, and it's like the heart of Jesus or something, and like you see his literal heart. Yeah. And like that's a common Catholic image that you'll see all over the place.
Yeah, I think Catholic images are very common, but
Catholicism is huge. There's giant churches everywhere, but and it's the major religion there, but there are so many street corner churches. Like, they're everywhere. And they have some of the funniest names. One of the funniest is the Snowball Church.
You saw the Snowball?
The Church of the Snowball? Did you ever see that?
No. Say that in Portuguese, because I want to hear that.
A Bola de Neve.
Igreja da Bola de Neve? Really?
Yeah, that's a real thing.
I've never seen that one.
There's Universal.
Yeah, and Universal's actually a pretty big church.
That's big, yeah. So that's not a street corner church. That's the one where they get all your money. And then there's... Deus é Amor.
Yep.
God is love. They got this nice rainbow. And in some of these churches, you'd be walking by at night, and it is literal screaming at the top of their lungs.
Yeah.
Like you probably heard the pastors just like shouting, "The Spirit of God will enter you."
It's just like the mix of like a homemade audio system with someone just yelling right
yeah,
into
it's
the
like
mic.
it's like a $10 microphone sound system.
And then that's all I get.
But these places are full, and they've got the little like white plastic chairs.
Yeah.
And everybody waving around.
Yeah, no, it's interesting how important religion is. There's very few people that you'll see that are going to say that they're self-proclaimed atheists. You're not going to have very many people that say that they're not sure what they believe in.
You will probably find some college students, maybe.
Yeah,
I noticed like some younger kids. I maybe encountered a handful.
And, you know, I have to preface that with where I was at. In the northeastern part of Brazil, it was very difficult to find anyone that said that they didn't believe in God or whether they weren't sure what they believed in. But most people had a religion that they believed in God or believed in spirits. You know, something there. There was very, very few agnostic or atheist views.
It's definitely the norm that you can approach somebody and just talk about Jesus, and it's not a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas in the U.S.,
if you talk about like church, it's just weird for people to come up and be like, I want to talk to you about Jesus.
It's a taboo subject to bring up. But it's like, it's assumed that it's like already on everybody's mind.
Yeah, in Brazil,
right? It's just on their mind because it's everywhere. Like there's pictures of it everywhere. It's like, hey, we want to talk to you about Jesus and leave a message at your house. Okay.
You know, yeah, because
I was expecting you.
Serving as a missionary, even though I was talking about a different religion, almost everyone was willing to accept to talk about Jesus because it was talking about Jesus, purely for that fact. It was, I'll talk about God at any time of the day.
They'll say
come in and let me know.
They'll say this in Portuguese. They'll say anything that talks about Jesus is good.
That's
Tudo que fala de Jesus é bom.
Tudo que fala de Jesus é bom. That's very true, and you just don't see that here. Yeah. So it's very much more theocratic centric, like God-centric country. And I'm willing to say this, that I don't feel like 100% of the people are like on board with that there's actually a God, but they're going to be able to just like whatever, like yeah, you talk about God, it's got to be good. Like
it's just like as true as that you sleep in a bed and you eat at a table, you know?
Yeah, it's just out there. So sure. And it's always a good thing. And most of the time if anyone talks about God or Jesus, it's always a good thing. So it's like, you know what? I'll take anything good right now. Yeah. I'll listen to that. Even if I don't end up believing at the end, like I'll listen to what you have to say about it.
Yeah. And it was surprising to me about how generous people were with their time, you know?
Yeah, people were like, I was surprised that many people were willing to just listen.
It was
someone
surprising.
Who just walked up to them. I had no idea who they were.
Yeah.
I walked up to them and said, "Hey, you want to talk about Jesus?" And they said, "Yeah." And then
like,
we said,
"You sure?
How about in about 30 minutes or so I stop by your house?" And like, that sounds great. And then you go there and you talk to them for about 30 to 40 minutes.
Yeah, you sit in their living room.
Talk to them for 30 to 40 minutes
for a while.
To an hour.
And then most of the time, your mission is probably like this. You ask them to be baptized. They're like, sure.
Well, so
like,
I think it's a difference of the way that we did it. I think a lot of people did ask that. I had a really hard time asking that after the first lesson. It was always like, hey, well, would you like to come to church, or would you like to have us come back and talk about something else?
Yeah.
My mission pushed for it to ask for, would you like to be baptized in this? After 45 minutes of talking about it,
yeah,
I had a really hard time doing that.
We would do a soft sales close where it's like, you know, if you read this book and you find out it's true, then will you commit to being baptized? And they're like, well, I don't know. And then we do it again, like, if you really receive like a spiritual confirmation, then will you commit to being baptized? Like, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I have said that before. I always just felt dirty doing it. Like,
yeah, but I was
me,
so like
it was so manipulative.
I was like, I'll just do what the mission president says, because mine really pushed, like, if you follow all these steps, like, you will have baptisms. He's like, yep. and he would say, like, every instruction that I'm giving you is like coming right from God. Like, you're like the transfer, like the area that I put you in, and the companion that you're with, and the person that you talk to, it's because God wanted you there and wanted you to do that. And so when the mission president tells you, we have like, and my first mission president would shout, like he would yell and he would pound the pulpit during our big meetings.
We had a bit of a different experience, so I didn't really trust everything my mission president said. So I mean, for me, it was very much a personal decision. You know, it was like It's like, you know what? I feel like I'm manipulating this person because I feel like what I'm asking at that point, I'm saying, if God tells you this is correct, will you be baptized? Well, that seems very like a no-brainer to someone who believes in God. Like, of course, if God tells me to do anything, I'll do that. But then my criteria is, if you feel good when you read this, will you do this? Because, my criteria was that God presenting this as truth was you'll feel good about it when you read it. Well, it talks about everything, it talks about God, it talks about this. Of course you're going to feel good about it. That's a very low bar to set as to be the proof of that.
You see, Chase, this is why you just didn't baptize that much. No, I'm just kidding.
I didn't. In comparison to everyone else I mentioned, no, I didn't baptize very much.
That's probably okay.
Comparison to people in other countries, though, that are much more criticizing, I guess, of religion, I baptized quite a bit. But that was one of the things about in Brazil. It was so easy to talk to people about God, and it was so easy to say, if you feel good, this is God telling you it's right. And that's one thing. It seemed like religion was something very fluid for Brazilians. It didn't have to be a set in stone thing. It was as long as you were believing in God and you were following God's wishes, it didn't quite matter where you were at.
And that's here's one of the most stark contrasts to Utah. Like Utah Mormonism, it's not fluid.
No, it's a very much hard.
We're told it is specifically this one way, and these are the correct things that you do, and if you don't do them, you got to repent and get back on track.
Yep.
Whereas in Brazil, you're right, it's very liquid, it's very loose.
Yeah.
And that's
as long
what
as
makes
you're
it
going
so
to church,
easy
that's
to teach.
something. That's
a big deal, yeah.
You know what? You're believing in God, whether someone says it's this way or that way, it's God still, no matter the what. Which I think is great in a way. I think that's... I can't say if this is 100% true, but I feel like there's less instances of Brazilians saying, "Oh, we're Catholic, and you chose to go to this other church, or you chose to marry someone that's from this other church that's not Catholicism. You're out of my family."
That's not as big a deal.
I don't think that's as big a deal. Like that banning from the family due to religion stuff, I think is very less common in Brazil than it is in America. Whereas America, sometimes you can believe so hard in your religion that if one of your children goes out of line, it's easy to disown them because they couldn't be a part of your family anyways because they are a part of a different religion, Well,
and they kind of have this belief that, like, oh, it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
Which is weird, well, because they're taught about fire and brimstone, but it's just like that doesn't matter on a personal level.
Yeah, and I think there's parts of it that I don't know. There's definitely some people that do feel very strongly about that. It does happen in Brazil. I just don't think it happens. I just don't think it happens at I just don't think it happens at the level that it happens here. Like, I was just talking the other day with some friends at work that they had a friend that was grown up very Catholic. Actually, it was a friend of mine. It was like his parents. So his mother was grown up very Catholic, and she married a guy who was pretty much he was very much an atheist. And like, as soon as she said that she was planning on marrying him, like, her parents basically sent her out of the house with the clothes on her back and said, "You're no longer a part of this family." Like, that, I think, just happens less often in Brazil. It's like, as long as you, although he was atheist, so I mean, but as long as, I feel like there's just still that family tie that holds in really tightly in Brazil. There's very much a strength in, like, your family. At that same time, like, it's very much, I don't know if it's that much different from here, because I know that there was part of that with me as well. But there's very much a shame to the family thing in Brazil. So someone who does something outside of what the family believes in, not necessarily with religion, but let's say you've got someone who, well, they do have some strong standing on homosexuality. Very strong. I think that has a higher prejudice in Brazil than it does in Brazil as far as someone being homosexual.
It's pretty extreme. Yeah.
But if you have someone who comes out as gay or lesbian or whatever in that spectrum of things, gender-wise, that can be like a huge level of shame on the family.
Mm-hmm.
Or someone who gets involved in drug trafficking or criminal activity, like that can also be a shame on the family.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can almost be disowned from the family or not treated as well in the family just because that's a part of you.
Mm-hmm.
Or that's because of your actions. I don't know, as far as like drug stuff, I think that can be very relatable in our culture as well.
Well, we were talking about the culture of honor, where what you do reflects on your entire family.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's some of that here, but it's
very strong in Brazil.
Yeah.
Like the family's honor.
Magnified a lot more there.
And that's something you see in our history. Our history is very much like that, but it's like we've moved on from that part.
Yeah.
And being able to like kind of almost empathize with where someone's at with what their decisions that they make. Like, well, I know that you're doing this, but you're still family.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're still going to try to help you. You know, we're not going to be accepting of your decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to come over for dinner, you want to come over for you know, holidays, that kind of stuff. Like,
this is the prodigal son parable.
Yeah.
Right? So isn't it funny how
even like
they'll be so intense on some parts of this religion, but so nonchalant about others.
Yeah.
And a lot of the evangelical churches, a lot of the evangelical people that I taught, they'll just say, well, it just really matters that what's in your heart. Like, well, Jesus is in my heart, so I don't need to do this other stuff.
Right. I don't need to go to church
You know?
because I think about Jesus. Like,
yeah.
And that's a very common thing, I think, in American culture is like, well, I still do good things, so I don't think I need to go to church.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very common thought here. And I think that's almost like a point of evolution, like in society norms, is like, well, you know what? If you're a good person, you're a good person. Whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God, you're still a good person.
There's a term for this, and I think it's called moral bargaining, where if you do things you see that are immoral, then you're more likely to go to church to make up for it, or you're more likely to do the things that you believe are moral. So in this context, would be going to church.
Yeah. And
then if you're a person that believes that you're moral throughout the week, then you can do the immoral thing of not going to church because it balances out. Yeah, I mean that's which is like really funny to think about because everybody does that.
It's very, very similar to me. Like that was one of the main reasons of me not going to church. Is like, just me not going to church has not changed who I am fundamentally. Mm-hmm. Like I'm still a good person. I still care about other people. I'm not going to be a jerk or do criminal things just because I'm not going to church anymore. Mm-hmm. I think it just, it is very much, like you said, a moral bargaining. It's something that you can bargain with and say, you know what, this makes up for that type thing. It's interesting. I think that's a less of a prevalent thing in Brazil. I think there's still more of like...
Yeah, I don't... Because that like moral bargaining is something that happens...
to church and talking about God. Like...
Yeah, that's just... Sounds like that. That's just the base.
Like, because if you don't want to talk about God and you don't want to go to church, most likely you're doing things you shouldn't be doing. Like, that's like the idea.
Yeah.
Again, that's my perspective.
Speaking of things we shouldn't be doing, Carnival. Just kidding. As missionaries, I should say. How's that for a segue?
That was good.
So, well, like what I heard about Carnival, well, like the idea, like in my head, I had, what do they call it? Well, Mardi Gras in Louisiana. I thought Mardi Gras in Louisiana was just like Carnival in Brazil, and there are similarities, right?
And it's
based on the same.
It's for the same
tradition.
Yeah. Which is Lent, and
right.
Like the preparation
so it's based in Catholicism.
Lent.
And it's having this big party of like symbolic sin or actual sin, and then you get that out of the way.
So you can, because as far as I understand, Lent is the 40 days that Jesus Christ fasted for. Mm-hmm. And so it's like you're supposed to pick one thing in your life that you usually do that you
give up.
Abstain for 40 days.
Okay.
Which is from Lent until Easter. Mm-hmm. That you would abstain from and not do. So some people say like, oh, I'm not going to eat chocolate because I eat chocolate a lot, and that's something that I feel is a vice in my life. And so they say the week of Carnival, like I'm going to eat as much chocolate as possible because for the next 40 days I'm going to not do it. And that can be anything for anyone. It's whatever their personal choice is. But Carnival is this big celebration, week long.
Yeah, that's funny
Every
how
day
they
has
go
a different kind of focus on it.
So extreme in one direction to then go extreme in the other.
Right.
Which, I'm no psychologist, but that seems unhealthy.
Yeah. Well, and so the interesting part about, and I don't know how big, you were in Campinas, I was in Recife.
Yeah.
Recife is like a capital of Carnival for Brazil.
Yeah.
Like it's a big hot spot for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of learned this recently in my last trip to Brazil that, it was like there's the galo, which is like the rooster. That's how they start out Carnival. And there's this big like paper mache rooster that comes down like the main street in the capital city. And everyone's out on the street. They're all partying, music, you do whatever. There's definitely drugs involved. And a lot of drinking. And then at midnight is when the man of midnight comes out, and it's this large paper mache man, top
And
hat.
when you say paper mache, you're talking about floats, right?
Yeah, so like floats. Yeah, like big like floats.
Like big giant floats
like
on cars.
30-foot, 40-foot tall floats. Like very large
This isn't just
floats.
newspaper and glue. Thrown together.
Very large floats. And it's the man of midnight. And he
That's
comes
cool.
out, he's got white pants, green suit coat, and
Homem
a
de
big top
madrugada?
hat.
Is that what they call it?
Homem de madrugada. When he comes out, like people literally swear that it's like the spirit of the man of midnight inhabits your body, because as soon as that thing comes out and it's midnight, it's like the entire group changes. Those people go insane wild. It's you can say anything, it'll be there. Drugs, heroin, weed, drinking, sex, whatever it is, like that stuff is all over the place. And so it turns into this giant craziness.
Well, they do do they do speaking in tongues things? Like they wave their
I'm
arm
sure there
around,
people
like,
are.
speaking?
I'm sure there's people that are. Like I don't have specific things saying that someone said, "Oh yeah, this happened." But it's a level of craziness that happens that people have said that they feel like they've been overtaken by another spirit, like the spirit of the man of midnight. And so it's like this moment that comes through, and so it's a very cultural thing, especially for that region where I was at. And even so much so, I don't know if it was the same in your mission, but for the entire week of Carnival, like we didn't go out on our mission. Like we didn't go out proselyting during that week. We would go out, we would visit some members that were there, but like very limited time on the street.
And was this when you were in a big city then, or was this the whole mission?
Any time that it was Carnival.
Because I was told it was just the big cities.
You didn't have to be in a big city to be there. Like I was in a neighborhood of the big city, so we call them bairros. Right. So the time that I was there for, I was in Iputinga, which is a bairro of Recife, and it's not a big city. But we were told basically to not really go out that week. So I mean, I think that week what we did, we just went and kind of visited some members of the church and people basically who weren't taking part in Carnival. Most of the people that you would see, because at that time most people have that time of work off. Like most businesses are closed during that time. And so
and we should say that it's like 5 days or more.
It's a full week,
right?
Yeah, it's a full week. Because they're going to start the weekend before it actually starts. It's like Monday through Friday. But yeah, they're starting. They're off work and they're starting their festivities the weekend of going through that next week, the next weekend.
Oh yeah, well it's like that Saturday and Sunday, and then it's Monday through Friday.
And even like weeks in preparation of Carnival, like people are like off work, they're out drinking, they're having fun. Like it's a big thing. And one of those things, like it doesn't matter really where you are as far as mission standards go. Like we just visited some members during that time, but most of the time we weren't out like trying to find new people to talk to, because either one, they were drunk, two, they weren't home because they were out partying in areas where they were having some carnival celebrations and stuff like that. Like carnival celebrations go on for almost 3 weeks in the area that I was at, because they start well before like carnival actual.
Well,
carnival.
I should add that I hope people don't take this portrayal as it's like this is like really really bad that this happens. This is actually a really a good thing, actually.
I think it's a very interesting cultural aspect of things.
Here's what I wonder about is like they have this occasion where they let their wild side out completely.
Yep.
And I wonder if that contributes just a healthier society overall, where places that don't have these type of celebrations, they have this wildness bottled up inside, and then it comes out in other ways.
Yeah. And
whereas this is a culture that says we are going to celebrate so hard that you don't feel like you're missing out on things when you go back to your boring office job. Right?
Yeah.
There's something to that. But I also want to at least touch on like the more wholesome like cultural aspect of it that I've read about here and there, that it was like a I think it's based on some kind of harvest celebration or something, and I think it got tied in with the Catholicism and the Lent. But there are places that like it's different in every state. Like they have their own.
I'm going to say it's going to be different
the biggest one's going to be in Rio, and these are ones I would invite the listeners to pull up just Rio Carnival 2020 or 2021 and prepare yourself. Well, it's going to be in February.
It could be. There could be some nudity.
There will be nudity, and it's and we can talk about this as well, because the main point here is to talk about these cultural differences in how the U.S. views nudity and how it's viewed in Brazil. And it's funny because there's like these invisible partitions.
Yeah.
In how they view nudity as in a sexual way and a non-sexual way. And during Carnival, it's viewed in a non-sexual way to the Brazilian eye. Like when I'm watching it with Lucia, I was like, this is a lot, right?
She's like, you want me to see this?
What's the big deal? Yeah.
Right.
But anyways, what I want to touch on is there's the nudity, there's the drugs and the partying and drinking and everything. But there is also the most beautiful costumes and floats you will ever see in your life.
Yeah, the level of creativity and dedication that people put into Carnival is a year-long process.
Yep.
As soon as one ends, the groups who are responsible for those are starting to work on the next year's. Like, it's a very big thing.
And Lucy was describing to me how they call them schools. And it's not necessarily a school, that's just the name of the group of people in a certain neighborhood. Schools. That they, like, these are just regular people. Like, they're not professional float makers, right? They're not professional, costume designers.
It's kind of like if you were a part of, the Rotary
They're
Club.
Directed.
Like,
but these costumes, this is an audio podcast that you're listening to, but
trying to explain something visual.
You got to look it up on YouTube. Like, they're absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, I would say, like, most of those are done. I believe that there's like directors of these samba schools that are very much, that's their full-time job.
Yeah, and they know how to
do those
just
things.
Teach and direct just average people.
But they've got your bands and your dancers and all those other things. Those are people who are probably not doing that for their full-time job. But it's like as if you were a part of like some societal club, like a Rotary Club or something where you go to it after work type thing. Like after work or days off or on the weekends, you're doing this work together as a group. Like kind of like when people go to their Zumba class at the gym. Like
I've heard of that.
Like, you know, people are going to the Zumba class, and then it's like if your Zumba class had a presentation to do. You guys would all work on something together.
It really is. That's actually a pretty good comparison, because it's not like just a bunch of 20-year-olds. They're 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're 60s. Like, there's some pretty old people that wear these, like, 20-pound costumes.
Yeah.
All day.
Large
and they're just marching through the street.
Yeah. Harnesses.
Yeah, it's just incredible. It's an incredible celebration. Like, I don't want listeners to take away from Carnival that it's just this, like, sin-filled, like, base, like, carnal, just like undertaking that they do every year. It's also it is that, but it's also just like a celebration of like every aspect of humanity.
Yeah, and I think there's a very deep cultural run to it. Like, there's a reason why they use this certain type of music, which is samba usually. It's usually samba.
And I'll do my best impression here. I'll put in a clip, but it's like, hey oh hey, 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 da, 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 ba-ba-ba-da-da-da, and then that will repeat
Yeah.
for 6 hours. And that's the song. They come out with a new one every year.
You've got samba bands that are playing samba. You've got dancers that are dancing samba. And, you've got competitions and things like that in specific cities. I would say, and this is my lack of experience, though, in my area, but, so I see, in Rio, that's the big, samba presentations. You've got, the huge parade that goes through with the dancers, and it's showcasing each one of the schools of samba. And each one of them is there, and then they get points as far as how they did, the decorations, and that kind of stuff. In Brazil, it's like a block party.
When you say Brazil, do you mean Recife?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean Recife.
There you go.
So in Recife, it's like a block. It's like a block party. It's just it's random people. Everyone dresses up in their own way, and everyone's out there.
So that sounds more like Mardi Gras.
There is 100% guarantee you're going to be rubbing up against someone as you're moving through the street, shoulder to shoulder, whatever. There's so many people out there.
Yeah.
You're going to bump into someone, and it's just everyone's out there to just have fun.
That's so funny to me. So if we compare this to the U.S., there is Mardi Gras, but but Woodstock is was such a big deal. It's this huge gathering of all these people to just party and go crazy.
Yeah.
But imagine if a Woodstock happened every single year.
Well,
in every major city in the U.S., and that's what Carnival is like.
Well, think about this. Mardi Gras is usually the big parties. It's New Orleans.
Right. It's a city.
It's
just the one.
Think of it as being in New Orleans, New York,
and
Los
and
Angeles,
LA, and San Francisco,
every capital
Seattle and
city having the same festival on the same week, and most people being off work for it. It's it's a huge.
That's why people are so people are so happy in Brazil.
And I'll have to say, even going into other holidays, Brazil has an amazing amount of holidays that
they
have
a lot.
Work.
Yeah, I want to touch on this too. So I learned that in Rio, they had so many state holidays. They were getting so many days off work. They had to pass a law to have no more holidays. And because their holidays aren't just one day over the weekend, they're usually 2 to 3 days or more.
Well, and I feel like that sometimes this can be a perception. Because there is so many holidays, some of them are bound to be on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And the reason, if they're on a Tuesday or a Thursday, you're going to get Friday or Monday off. It's just going to happen.
Because everybody's going to be hungover. So.
If it's on Tuesday, you're getting a 4-day weekend no matter what, because you're getting Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. If it's on a Thursday, you're getting Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because no one wants you back on Friday after the holiday on Thursday.
Brazil's greatest strength is just the one thing holding it back.
And
have you seen the meme where it shows this futuristic city and it says, if such and such happened, this is what the world would look like?
No.
If Brazil didn't have holidays, this is what it would look like. Kidding.
Yeah. So, but it's funny though, because you're hard pressed to go a month without having at least 1 or 2 holidays where you're off.
Which is great as a missionary, because people are home and they're in a good mood.
Yeah, it was great. But if you were to think about America that way, I mean, I live in I work in a company that's very progressive in the way as paid holidays. We have 11 holidays in a year. That makes out to almost once per month. But it's common in Brazil that you're going to have probably 2 holidays in a month, and most of those are going to be made up of Catholic holidays. So for the various saints.
Yeah, it's always saint something.
Yeah.
Saint something.
Most of those are very Catholic related holidays, which I find to be the funniest thing in the world to me personally. Because you're having a Catholic or a religious holiday get you out of work, even if you do or don't follow that religion.
True, right? You benefit.
That's the funniest thing to me. You don't have to care at all about that.
Yep, the Catholicism benefits everybody. Okay, it's food time. So before I went to Brazil, I just assumed it was Mexican food. you know.
Yeah, I would say like
And it's
just thinking it was like
it's almost
some type
Mexican
of like
food.
Latin American like
Right.
Mexican food.
I was
Because-
just thinking tacos and burritos and whatever. And there's no tortillas. It's kind
Absolutely
of
no
the same
tortillas.
types of foods. It's
Like-
rice and beans and it's chicken. No tortillas.
And for those people who are gonna nitpick,
yeah.
there is tortillas available in very select stores, and depending on the city you're in,
But it is like a luxury item.
You might be able to find them.
I
but
saw it in
you're-
rich people's houses.
Yeah, you're
and there's a
gonna be
brand.
very hard pressed to find this in general population.
There's a brand that comes with it's a bag of 10 tortillas and it's called Wrap 10. It's
Yeah.
genius. So
Uh-huh.
you know exactly how many you're getting and you know what it does.
Well, I saw tortillas once in 2 years that I lived there, and it was when we went to a specifically Mexican restaurant.
Oh.
The only Mexican restaurant I have ever seen
Mhm.
in the area that I lived in.
Mhm.
And it was all right. Like, it was okay. But for the price that it was going as if it was like a Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, like very high-end restaurant.
Yeah, and then the
prices.
food's just not
Like,
that great, huh?
And it was like, it's Mexican food. And
It's really funny when one culture like tries so hard to do the other culture
yeah.
with all this pomp and
And
circumstance.
that's my experience with most like food restaurants in Brazil is that if it's anything other than Brazilian style, it's very expensive.
hmm
You know,
Yeah, it's got
Pizza
that
Hut
exclusive high end.
was
Really, yeah, we got to talk about the fast food restaurants.
yeah,
So,
because
because here's a difference between the U.S. and Brazil. So, chain restaurants that are considered mostly garbage by anyone with any taste, if I
Yeah.
may say so. Like Pizza Hut is not good.
well,
McDonald's is not good.
sometimes I
in
don't like
Brazil?
Pizza Hut, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
But,
we go
like,
there. I still eat it.
I remember growing up,
but
there
they're
was like a
incredible.
there's a very big shame associated with going to McDonald's. Like it was like you didn't want to see anyone that you knew when you went to McDonald's.
Yeah, you had a hat and sunglasses on.
In Brazil, going to McDonald's, you would see executives. It was like
Yeah.
suit and tie.
It's where you go for your birthday.
Yeah, it was a very high class thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was expensive, so only the people that really had money could really afford to take their family out to McDonald's.
But
and so it was a very
also,
respectable place.
It's delicious.
The quality
The
was
food is actually
through the
really
roof.
good.
It was
Like
really
the
good.
meat, like it's real meat.
Yeah, the one thing that I was happy about is that the pickles tasted exactly the same.
No. So when I was in Campinas, which is the third biggest city in Sao Paulo, so it's huge. It's
Yeah.
like it's like Mexico City.
Yeah.
We would get the financial secretary, whatever they're called. When I showed up, he doubled our payday basically.
Right.
We got a new mission president. We're really busy working in the office, so he doubled our payday. Because it took too much time to go to a member's house to eat lunch that they would make for us and come back. So we went to Burger King every day for 2 months.
Yeah. And I'll say
And
this,
it was
just as far
so
as,
good.
as
It
background,
was so good.
Mormon missionaries, when they're out, they receive a specific amount of money every month.
Right.
We
Get an allowance.
You
or-
get
or
an
a payday or
allowance
whatever,
per
yeah.
month, and so he's talking about his financial secretary was
Yes.
able to increase that amount
There you go.
that we would
Yeah,
receive.
for those
every
not
month.
familiar, I should have said that.
Yeah.
So in most parts of the mission, you have very, very limited funds, and they want to teach you financial responsibility, which is great for a 19-year-old.
Yeah, it's good
The
to
sooner
learn.
you learn that, the better, right?
Mhm.
But when you're in the working in the mission home or the office, they call it, and you're doing all the paperwork, it's different.
Well, it's
You
hard to
need
get
more money.
out from where you're at in the office
Yeah.
because in Brazil and when we're on our missions,
You're walking around. You're in
Members-
the neighborhood already.
members put out a
Mhm.
calendar of
Right.
when they're going to provide a lunch for the
Right.
missionaries, and lunch being the biggest meal of the day, like that's the most important meal.
Right.
Typically, if you're out proselyting, you've got a specific area that you work in,
Mm-hmm.
and the members of that area will then assign days that they'll give you lunch, and you just go to that member's house and they
Mhm.
provide you lunch. You give them a little message, and then you start out with the rest of your day. Whereas when you work in the office, you're doing mostly administrative work,
Mm-hmm.
and you're in the downtown area, so it's like
Yep.
to try to find the members of the
You
area
might as well
that
go to a
you're assigned
restaurant.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easier for you to go downstairs, go out to the next
Mhm.
building over that's got a restaurant in the bottom of it, and
Yeah.
you can just get some food.
So I remember we did go to Pizza Hut one time for one of the other missionaries' birthdays,
Yeah.
and it was so good.
Well,
I was like, Pizza Hut is not supposed to be.
I
good.
never went to
Burger King's
Pizza
not
Hut
supposed to be
once
good.
when I was there.
Well, I was just lucky
because
like they're not in very many places. They're only in like the really big cities.
well, and
maybe like in the
Sifi had a
malls.
Pizza Hut.
Oh,
I remember seeing it, and I don't know if it was like this when you were there, but the waiters were suit and tie waiters.
oh yeah, it's like
so
it
was slacks.
It's like a black tie affair.
It was slacks with a red dress shirt and
funny.
a black tie and belt, like very nice looking waiters. I don't know if you've been to a Pizza Hut, but that's not what the waiters look like. Not to mention, most Pizza Huts don't even have a dine-in section anymore. Like, when was the last time you saw a Pizza Hut that has a dine-in section?
The last time I went to Pizza Hut was in Wyoming, so like, the worst of the worst.
Black shirt, black pants, you're good. Like a little apron. Like, but I remember thinking about at one of the points, it was like a regular medium pizza. It was 80 reais, which at the time
now
that I
that's
was
going to
there,
be about $45 maybe.
At the time that I was there, yeah, it was about $40 because it was about 2 to 1. Dollar to reais. $40 for a medium pizza to sit down at Pizza Hut. That's ridiculous. I couldn't imagine paying that much.
I remember they were very expensive. We got 2 kind of medium-ish pizzas.
Yeah.
We got kind of 2 slices.
I mean, so yeah, $80 for a pizza. Whereas McDonald's was like 16 to 20 for like a meal, which is like $8 to $10, which is about comparable, but 16 to 18 in that currency. I mean, medium wage you were getting at that time, I think, was $750 a month. So think about making $750 a month and then having to try to take your family out for $20 a meal.
Right.
Like that, it's just it's not comparable to the same thing. Even
but did you get pizza from other places pretty regularly?
Yeah. So there's Brazilian pizza places that were really like 15, 20 reais a piece, and you'd get the best pizza that you could ever imagine.
Really.
And I really like the Brazilian
funny?
style pizza because it's different in a way that you can't explain. You can
It's hard to describe because the pizza sauce
it's still
is
marinara.
minimal.
It's still tomato, and it's still bread, and it's still cheese and meats and other things. But for whatever reason, the ratios that they use and the way that they make the bread is a completely different style of bread. It's a denser
correct me
bread.
if I'm wrong. Here's the there's 3 main flavors that I saw. There's the margarita, which I think most people kind of know. It's the cheese,
normal.
the tomato, and olive oil. And then there's the caipirinha with frango.
Yeah.
So that's like shredded chicken with this liquid cheese.
It's kind of like cream cheese.
Imagine
so
Cheese Whiz, but just really good.
I'll explain that
really
one better because it's not like Cheese Whiz at all. Because you can't even think about a good Cheese Whiz and even come close to
but
comparing
it's
to this.
squirted out of a tube, is what I'm saying.
It's a soft cream cheese.
Yeah. Okay, so there's that. So that one was good, and then there's the calabresa and onions. Right? So
yeah, which is
so
the
this
Portuguesa.
Sausage that's not super
sorry,
spicy.
that's the
Is that what they call it?
calabresa. Portuguesa is a very staple one from where I was at.
Okay.
Which is basically it's got slivered hard-boiled eggs, onions, calabresa, green olives with the pit.
I remember that.
And corn.
Yeah, that one I wasn't into as much.
That one's my favorite.
That's
that was
okay.
My favorite.
Those olives.
That was my favorite.
Dude,
the olives were amazing.
You're not supposed to eat them.
The olives are amazing.
No, they're just
I love
poison,
green olives. They were very big in green olives. The other thing about green olives that we have here, you have green olives that get pitted, put in a pimento.
Yeah, there you bite it or you break your tooth.
Well,
like I ate that one time. Like this is not. You're not supposed to eat this.
It's because you were expecting to have a pitted olive. But the thing about
you should expect the unexpected.
You're expecting someone to do extra work for you where they're not going to do it. But the thing that's different about the green olives in Brazil is that our green olives have almost, even when they don't come in like a tin can, like canned olives, they have a tinny flavor to the way that they're conserved.
Okay.
The flavor of a green olive in Brazil.
Glass jars there, right?
Well, they're only glass jars, which we have green olives in glass jars. But something about removing the pit and placing something else in there, you lose some of the flavor from it because a non-pitted green olive.
But isn't it okay? Isn't it okay if you lose the flavor if the flavor is like awful?
Well, I think you're talking about that you just bit into one and it hurt your tooth.
No, the flavor of the olive, they're terrible.
I think that's the point where we're going to have to agree to disagree because I love the olives in Brazil way more than I love any green olive.
I love everything else there except the olives.
But yeah, the pizzas there, it's something that you can't explain. It is different, but when you look at it and you try to tell someone the ingredients, it sounds exactly the same. It's just not.
Did you have any super mega pizza?
No.
Because maybe this is only in...
Super Mega Pizza might have been like a specific,
and that's the name of the place.
Yeah, see,
and they mean it. When they say Super Mega, it's funny because they use the word Super Mega for a lot of things.
Which was the fat man's pizza.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Super Mega Pizza is literally like a meter. So for the imperial system, like it's a yardstick. Like that's its diameter.
No, we never had any pizzas like that. I never saw any pizzas like that.
And that would be like breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 4 missionaries.
Yeah, definitely.
It's awesome.
What did you eat? So I'm interested in this. What did you eat typically for
like regularly?
Dinner? So because
for dinner, milk and crackers.
Because
and I would slice up a little bologna thing.
As a missionary, we would have typically lunch provided by a member, which is going to be something typical, which is rice, beans, maybe noodles or like a macaroni,
and then sometimes
spaghetti.
They'll have a vinegar salad.
And a vinegar salad.
So they'll do tomatoes and onions, and then vinegar on it, and that's the salad. And then sometimes you'd have lettuce.
I had lettuce more often. Almost every time if we had a salad, it was lettuce, tomato, onions with salt and vinegar.
There's a lot of baked
virgin oil.
Did you get a lot of that?
We got a lot of baked chicken is probably the best way to say it because I want to avoid the fact that we're giving out the idea that it's fried chicken. It's like baked in the oven.
Yeah, they bake it in the oven.
Or it's just cooked on like a saucepan, so it's a little like fried in a saucepan. Like in a frying pan, not actually breaded and fried. But yeah, chicken was very common because it's cheaper.
Macaron were noodles, like almost always.
Noodles, which is
kind
of
rice
like a
and beans,
spaghetti style noodles.
Always ready to go.
And then...
Did you get a lot of spaghetti with like minimal sauce?
Yeah, so sauce is very limited.
Really common.
And that's because they mix it together, and it's because it's not served separate. It's
not that the sauce is like super expensive. That's just...
how
they do it, right?
Noodles that was then mixed with a tomato paste, and so you just had like this very thin layer of tomato around the noodles, and that's what your noodles were most of the time. It wasn't like there was a lot of meat and stuff in it. Typically, as far as where I was at, a typical lunch would be rice, beans. That would be half and half. Sometimes it would be brown beans, like a pinto bean. Other times you might get a black bean. I prefer black beans, so we loved it. But black beans were a little bit more expensive.
Yeah, and they were more rare, I noticed.
So you would have black beans less, but that was my favorite. And then so rice, the black beans, and like
they'll have some kind of protein.
Meat, so either a chicken or a slice of beef. And the slice of beef was usually about a quarter inch thick, and it was always well done.
And they usually have onions on it.
Yeah, and it's like they call it carne acebolada or beef acebolada, which is just beef with fried, like sautéed onions.
Onion to beef.
Yeah. And then you'd have your salad, which would be lettuce, tomato, onion, and there would be on the table you would have salt, a white vinegar, and some virgin olive oil.
And oftentimes they'd have a type of flour, corn flour type thing called farofa or farinha.
Yeah, farinha.
And it's not cornmeal, like it's some other grain.
Yeah, it's basically if you've had what is that called? Malto meal? Have you ever had malto meal?
Maybe.
Malto meal is like a breakfast cereal that we use, and it's a wheat-based.
I thought malto meal was a chocolate shake drink, like a breakfast shake.
That's just, I think, a malted drink.
All right.
But malto meal.
I wasn't born in the 70s.
Malto meal was like an alternative to like hot oatmeal.
I thought
it's very small.
Oh, I'm thinking of Ovaltine.
Yeah,
which they do have. We got to talk about Ovaltine, the milkshakes. We'll get there.
Never had.
Did you not have that?
No.
Oh no.
But malto meal is a very similar thing. I've actually used it in place of farinha in some recipes that I've tried to make here. Basically, it's a wheat-based grain, so it's like almost like it's been processed in a way, but it tastes like sand.
But it's salty. Like it's It doesn't taste like sand.
It's a sand texture.
It is a sand texture.
It's a sand texture.
And it doesn't make any sense because everything is like so dry. Like they don't do a lot of sauce, you know?
Yeah.
They don't do hot sauce. Like they don't do spicy foods or sauces.
So there's a difference between farinha and farofa. So farinha is an untempered flour grain.
Okay.
So it's just.
And anyways, we should say
sand.
that you just put this on your rice. And
Yeah,
beans,
you just put
and
it on
gives it a
top.
more like salty, crunchy.
It just kind of adds some
thing.
texture, and it soaks up some of the extra moisture. So it makes it kind of a bit of a thicker. If you've got some of the runny sauce, it'll thicken it up a little bit. But farofa can be mixed in with either like pumpkin or bacon or banana to add some additional flavor. It's a very typical topping to put on with rice and beans. And yeah, that's like a typical meal. But we were left to our own devices for figuring out what we wanted to do for dinner. Now, a lot of times you're in another country, you're living in another country, and the person who lives with you is a native of that country. So sometimes you get little ideas of here and there from what they would typically have for that, and you're limited to the amount of money that you have per month and what you could afford. Our dinner, that was like my favorite that I did like every time, was like a French bread roll, which is a very, maybe about 5-6 inches long, 3 or 4 inches wide. Very good, very different to French bread rolls in America. They usually had a little bit thicker and tougher exterior skin.
Well, you like most places had a bakery down the street.
Yeah, you just had a bakery down the street.
And you pick it up the day it's baked.
You go down, get your bakery, you get your processed meats and your cheese and your eggs,
and
that's all you did. You did that almost every day or every other day. You get fresh bread. Yeah, it was amazing. That part was amazing.
I liked that.
And so I would have, there's a cheese that they had there. It was called queijo coalho. And I don't know if you guys did much.
I haven't heard of that.
It's almost kind of like a queso panela, which is a Mexican style bread cheese. That's a variant of like the queso fresco, which is like the farm cheese or fresh cheese.
Okay.
So queso panela, which we called queso coalho or queijo coalho in Portuguese, you would slice it into like 1/4-inch thick slices, and then you would fry it on the frying pan, and it would get just this crusted outside, but it would be kind of like almost squeaky cheese.
This is reminding me. Yeah.
It was almost like a squeaky cheese type texture. And so I'd make a couple slices of that, put some eggs and some mortadella, which is kind of like bologna, but you can find mortadella in the United States. That's a thing you can find.
Oh, yeah. I always wondered what the difference between that and bologna was, because it's a mix of...
It's different.
It's a mixture of
and
something.
I don't know what it is, but if you
But it's really good.
Smith's Grocery here in Utah,
do they have it?
Boar's Head has mortadella.
Oh, cool.
They mix it with green olives, but...
Oh, no. Yeah, that disturbed me.
It's really good, and it's the only thing that I've actually found that, because it's not exactly bologna, it's similar. Mortadella is its own thing, but mortadella, eggs, queijo coalho on a French bread, and then yogurt in Brazil is different. It's very liquid.
Yeah, well, it's drinkable.
It's
like
drinkable.
all their yogurt is drinkable.
Yep, it's drinkable.
I don't remember seeing a pot of yogurt
thin,
that was thick.
Very thin.
And you get it in a sack.
And you get it in a sack.
So you just cut it with scissors and you just...
A 1 liter sack. And so for dinner, I would have 2 sandwiches with eggs, mortadella, queijo coalho, and a 1 liter of yogurt.
Okay, I'm remembering what I did. So I talked about, like, they have these crackers. They're like vanilla flavored crackers that you've probably seen. I'll remember the name. And then we had like... Maizena, there you go. And then there's a lot of chocolate milk brands. Chocolate milk mix, I should say.
Yep.
So like here we got Nesquik. So there they have Nescau.
Nescau was my favorite.
Toddy. And they say it Toddy. And there's probably like some other like off-brand ones.
Yeah.
But those that like Nescau 2.0.
And they did have Ovaltine. I'm starting to remember Ovaltine.
Yeah. Okay, and then there's Ovaltine. And so they got these. It's funny they have this like trifecta of competing chocolate drink mixes.
Yeah.
And they're all pretty good.
Nescau was my favorite.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And it was energetico, as they said. It was an energetic.
Nescau 2.0.
Yep,
that's what it was. Yep, and it had a lightning bolt
from
on
the future. Yeah. So that was good. So I would just mix that up with the milk. And speaking of sacks, like you'd get milk in a sack if you could find it. Most of the milk was not pasteurized. They would do some other treatment. I can't remember.
Nothing.
But the ones that you would get in the box was very weird. You had to mix sugar in with it.
I never mixed sugar with the box milk.
I mean, you had to do something. Seemed just fine.
Yeah, that just seemed just fine to me.
Not in every area that I was.
But for me, we did mostly powdered milk. I didn't like really the box milk, and so.
But did you not have milk in saquinho, as they say?
only in some areas that we like.
Oh, that was the best
more
milk I
like
ever had.
The interior side of things, we would have milk in the bags, and that was like a fresh milk. It was almost like.
Oh, that was so good. Well, I would It's funny that you bring up this bread because we had these sandwichetas, like these sandwich machines.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just take regular bread and put cheese and mortadella in it, and then just put that in the sandwich machine. I didn't do that elaborate thing that you did.
Oh no, yeah, I'd make.
But the nice thing is that takes like 5 minutes. And the thing is, life as a missionary is you wake up at 6:30, and then you like study for 3 hours, and then you're out on the road until you get home like 9:30 or 10.
I mean, I did things.
And so you have like 5 minutes to eat.
Yeah, so you had breakfast at home. You would go out. You'd do some. Ideally, you'd do some proselyting, talk with some people, come have lunch with a member, go out and do some more proselyting, come home, have some dinner for yourself, and then finish out your night with some more proselyting. Like that was the life of a missionary.
And in between these activities, you're proselyting.
Yeah, walking a lot in Brazil specifically.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have cars. We didn't have bikes.
Right.
Everything was walking. But I would say another food that needs to be brought up is feijoada.
Right.
So I don't know if they really had feijoada where you were at.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's very much particular coming from like the slave community.
Yep.
And it was
so
basically
we'll describe what this is. It's a stew mixed with a lot of different types of meats.
Yeah.
So they'll do beef and chicken and sausage and bacon.
I don't know about this chicken. The chicken's definitely not going to happen in the
They don't do chicken in it?
No. So typically, like a traditional feijoada is going to have pig's feet, pig snout, sausage, and beef. And it's usually going to be a salted beef, so a salt-cured beef, which usually needs to be boiled previously before cooking with it to get the salt out of the meat, because it's a salt-preserved meat. It's not just like kind of salty meat. It's if you eat it, I swear you're going to dry your insides out of how salty it is. You need to boil it with regular water just to get some of the salt out of it. It's the way it's preserved. The meat can sit literally on the counter at the butcher shop just fine.
It's not going anywhere. That's funny.
Yeah, it's a salt preserved meat, salt cured, and so that was one of the things, and it came from the slave population at the time because that's what the leftovers were.
Right.
You'd have the pig snout, the pig's feet.
It's like the scraps.
Chicken feet, something like that. You'd have something. It was just the scraps of what they would have, and at least for where I was at, the meat that I'm talking about, the salted beef. Traditionally was like a salted donkey meat.
Wow.
So, it was definitely leftovers.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff. But that became a very traditional bean stew. So it's black beans with all this extra meat in it. The side meats would be.
Well, it's funny because it's so good, and it's known as one of like the main dishes of Brazil. So, like this leftover stew is super popular, and
it's
a lot of people like it. And it's not easy to make. Like it takes a long time.
Yeah, it's typically served with rice, some sautéed kale, or collard greens.
Right.
Probably collard greens rather than kale. To be correct.
Well, so Lucy's explained to me how there's like two main different types of kale.
Couve, yeah.
And the way they do, they'll chop it up in very slim strips.
Yep.
And they'll saute it and mix it with butter and stuff.
Yeah, and so you mix it. We typically do it sautéed with butter and garlic, and a little bit of salt, and then some orange wedges, and some farinha or farofa is what we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And so that's like the typical dish of feijoada is like that plate, and it's delicious.
Well, and then like that's in the top tier of Brazilian foods that they're known for, and right up there is just churrasco in general, which is like their barbecues. Yep. Which in the U.S. a barbecue is hot dogs and hamburgers, which I think is just a tragedy. Yeah. Compared to what they do in Brazil, is they have every kind of meat you can imagine.
Sirloin with fat cap, ribeye. You're getting flank steak, and it's all done on this rotisserie
Mm-hmm.
style, and then they come around, slice off. If you've ever been to a
Mm-hmm.
Brazilian restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
that's gonna be about accurate.
Yep.
But yeah, it's
But you'll pay. In your area? Did you have any restaurants that were like Rodizio's?
we did.
And you'll pay half, or you pay like a third for a plate, is what you will hear. I
Yeah,
remember I paid maybe like it was like 12 or 15 reais
no, ours were very expensive.
for what you paid $25 for. Wow.
I remember one of the places that we went to down in Recife was 50 reais.
Wow.
So
Yeah, we did go to some really expensive restaurants, but we found this
which
one.
now, like at the time I was there,
Mhm.
yeah, it was about
It was 2 to
25 bucks
1, right?
because it's 2 to
Mhm.
1. Right now it's about 5.50 to 1. So yeah,
Right.
it's like $10.
Yeah.
But it's most of the places up there are between 50 and 100 reais to actually go to a Rodizio's.
Well, I think I just found a lot of medium cost restaurants.
There's definitely some that I think are out there, but most of ours, and I think it's because you're more in the south. The south is a very Brazil.
What's
is
an economic powerhouse?
It's an economic powerhouse, but a lot of beef is raised in Rio Grande do Sul, which is right next to São Paulo. Just
Okay, so it's
just south
cheaper
of it.
to get there.
We do have some beef raising and stuff like that up in the northeast area,
Mhm.
but beef was still expensive. Yeah, beef was still expensive. So going to a Rodizio's
Did you have
or a barbecue place, it was.
Well, did you have a
expensive.
lot of restaurants just in the different cities you were in that were buffet style, where you'd pay
Yeah,
very little and it
it's
was all you
very-
can eat,
it
and
was
it's like
very
really high
common that
quality
it was
food.
The places that we would go, it was very common. It was weight based. So you would
Okay,
pay,
yeah, you'd fill up
pay
your plate. and weigh it.
25, 30 reais per kilo.
Mhm.
And so you would go out there, you'd fill up your plate, and then you'd pay per the weight of the plate.
Yeah, I remember
And
that.
so yeah, that was a very common. Every once in a while, you'd have a place that was called like a buffet without the weight. So it was like you would just pay like a straight 20 reais,
Yeah.
and it would be you wouldn't have to weigh the plate. You could just
Yeah.
load up. It was one plate. You could load it up. You weren't going back,
Yeah.
but it was as much as you could get on a plate that you would eat. That's fine.
I remember this one city I was in where they had it was like a building for this city that was like taxpayer funded, where they would just give you a meal. And you could choose to pay or not. And so you would see like people without homes there, and you would also see business people and like people of all ages. It's like it's a really simple meal. They'll give you, the rice and the beans and maybe like a hot dog and then some kind of dessert. And this city was a place where like nobody's going hungry.
Yeah,
And it wasn't elaborate, and you could choose to pay like 1 or 2 reais, is what they call it. And I thought, this is really cool.
I never saw anything like that.
And that was unique. I think that was unique to like some of the other Brazilians that I talked to. I wish I could remember the name of this city. But that, I don't know how much we want to go into the topic of like their healthcare system and like other like systems that they have in place that just
Well, they've
comes
got
from
private
this
and public,
mindset. well, like so their healthcare system, because when I was 19, I didn't know how the U.S. healthcare system worked.
Yeah.
You just go to the doctor and you go home. And so when I needed to see a doctor there, I found out you just go to a health clinic, and then they treat you, and then you go home,
Yeah.
and you don't get a bill. And that was like brand new to me.
Yeah, there's like a public health system that you can use. If you choose to have
You can have private insurance to get some advantages.
But it's a different hospital.
They treat everybody.
There's a public hospital.
Mhm.
There's a private hospital. It is separate. Like if you're going to, and maybe you've got a doctor that goes to both places. Their doctors are very fluid as far as like serving in different hospitals.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew a doctor there that he did shifts in about 3 or 4 different hospitals. So he would go and spend a week here, spend a week there, spend a week there, and he would, his patients would be assigned to him, as per the time that he was going to be there. But there are private hospitals which are going to accept the insurance. They've got a very similar insurance system as far as like some companies help provide a cheaper form of insurance. They pay part of it. The employees pay part of it. Then you have a private insurance. When you leave a company, However, they do have an option of like when you lose your insurance from a company, you can go to that same insurance, and that insurance will give you a discount to continue your service with them. So it won't be the full price, but it won't be quite what you were paying with the company paying part of it. So there is privatized insurance, but they also have their system of government health. And if you don't have any money, that's fine. You don't have to pay for it.
Yeah.
It's completely provided service. And that's just how it works. You just go. Sometimes there can be some wait times as far as depending on what surgery you're trying to do, and there's that kind of stuff.
But one of the most notable things I read like earlier today of what they spend on their GDP on healthcare, 9%. The U.S. is around 20 to 30%. Huh. That's a big deal.
What do we actually spend money on? Because as far as I'm concerned, the government doesn't actually spend anything on the government on health.
It's Medicare and Medicaid and the VA. I don't know, but yeah, that's something I want to go more in detail on an episode where I specifically talk about those types of issues. But like culturally speaking, well, like to wrap up the food part, I want to talk about like drinks and desserts.
Yeah.
So the drinks there, like Brazilians drink is guarana, and there's the guarana berry that like grows in the north, and it's super sour, I guess, and it's also an energetic, like it's a stimulant, like
caffeine. It has a lot of caffeine in it naturally.
And you what's cool, like you can buy this here. Yeah, they have it at like Macy's.
They do have it at Macy's. They've also got it at some like Latin American markets and stuff like that.
So it's a fruity drink, and hard to describe a flavor.
Guarana,
yeah.
Guarana.
But like Coca-Cola is very popular, and also Fanta drinks, and they'll have a lot more flavors of Fanta.
Yeah, they do. I'm gonna say as far as my area, fresh juice was
that too.
Was very much
because
more
there's so many fruits.
The juice you've got graviola, which is goyab.
That one was weird.
Wait, graviola is
this weird white.
It's an interesting one.
Fruit.
It's a large green fruit, and it's got
white
this
in the middle.
White pulp. That surrounds the individual seeds.
It just kind of tastes
slimy.
like.
It's kind of slimy, so you get like this thick, frothy, slimy.
It's like a
juice.
Milky coconut bad breath person, like.
But
breathing their bad breath on you. That's what it tastes like.
I don't feel like the bad breath is there, but like I like graviola. And then there's goyaba, which is going to be your guava. You had fresh guava, at least where I was at. Acerola, which is a type of a cherry, and it's a delicious
sour.
drink.
I like that. Yeah.
Pineapple juice was really good. And like juice in Brazil, it was like whatever fruit there is. Because we can go through and start listing fruits. You put it in a blender with water and ice and sugar and blend it up, then throw it through a strainer. You have the juice. And it was the most simple thing. And that was like such a weird foreign idea for me as an American kid that you could just throw in whatever fruit into a blender that you wanted to, and you could have the juice.
And you drink it.
Because most of our juice came from like Tang, High C. Like it was some like sort of powdered juice that you would make a juice. You didn't really have like even orange juice, at least from where I grew up. Maybe people in like California and Florida that have more readily
like
available
naturally squeezed,
oranges.
like on the spot orange juice. I had some families make that for us, and I was like, this is unbelievable.
But even the orange juice, it still wasn't squeezed. Like we never had squeezed orange juice.
Oh, they do it differently. They cut up their oranges. Yeah, they peel it in a spiral.
Yeah, you peel off the
it's
citrus
like so
part
elaborate.
Of it, throw it in a blender and then throw it through some type of sieve or
they have some kind of strainer,
a filter strainer, like a wire mesh strainer, and then you add sugar and ice, and you got fresh juice, and it was delicious.
Yeah, and they're all over the place,
like
and even the box juice, like the juice. freshly blended.
Lime juice is one of my favorites because their limes are delicious. There, you've never seen a juicier lime than you've ever seen. Like,
but also like the box nectars or the box juices there.
Or even the powdered.
Also very good. Yep.
I'm going to tell you right now, I've got like 25
of the Tangs.
Powdered.
I was going to say like they
juice.
have like 20
different
flavors of Tang.
Yeah. I've got Tang that's
Mama, I wanted to say papaya.
Cupuaçu manga.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know how to say cupuaçu in English because I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist. It's something from the Amazons. And then I've got mango and guava. And, all these things. And it's like, if Tang makes this, I don't know why it's not sold here. because I'm sure people would love to have like a guava tang. Are you kidding me? And it's delicious. It's amazing. A mango tang, mango juice. Mango juice is one of the most lovely juices that didn't quench your thirst that I've ever seen in my life. Like it was like getting to eat a fresh mango without actually drinking anything. It was you still wanted a glass of water next to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is just like really thick and strong. Anyways, the caldo chicana I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Did you get that on the street?
Yeah, so we had that a lot.
This is sugarcane juice, and so these guys would have these contraptions on the street that, as Chase is getting his, what is that called again?
This is Lagavulin.
Lagavulin.
Whiskey. If you're a fan of the show Parks and Rec, it's Ron Swanson's favorite whiskey, and it's delicious.
It smells like campfire.
It's very smoky.
In a very pleasant way. Okay, so caldo chicana, they'd have this like juicing machine that they would take these giant sugarcane stalks and mash it through. Did you see these?
Yeah.
All right.
So it's this like,
and it would just squirt out the sugarcane juice. So you're just you literally drinking liquid sugar. And 2 cups, you're gonna pass out.
Yeah. So. To explain a little bit about this, it's this little machine that's got like these gears that come up, and basically 2 gears come together, and you put the sugarcane stalk in between the 2 gears, and it squeezes them together to where it squeezes out all the sugar juice from the cane.
And it's totally
it comes
sanitary.
Out, it's like green, and it just pours out this little spout from inside this machine, and it's just.
And they put it in like a used washed like Coca-Cola 2-liter bottle. That's what we would get.
Never seen that.
You didn't see
Mine
that?
came in just normal, like throwawayable, like what do we call those? Those plastic cups. Just
Just a plastic cup.
Descartable.
Yeah. Disposable.
Maybe plastic cups. Yeah. Disposable plastic cups, and it comes out and it's green. And it's delicious. Like, I loved it.
Yeah. It's just so strong. Like. One small cup is like a lot.
Were you ever in an area where you were able to get just a stock of cane sugar?
Well, I met some people who just gave us some sugar cane, and you just chew on it. Just like chewing it.
So we would get a stock of sugar cane in certain areas. It had to be someone who grew their own and would provide you. They're like, hey, you should have this or try this. And we would just sit there. We would shave off the outside edge with a knife, and then we would just cube it off of it, and you just throw these cubes in your mouth and you just chew on it, and then
you spit out the pulp after.
Eventually all the juice comes out of it, and you spit the pulp out, and it's just
Very
like this
pleasant.
woody stalk that you poop, like that you spit out, and it's just looks like a bunch of slivers all tied together.
Yep.
However, I also learned that that's a reason why some people lose their teeth, because it's very abrasive on the enamel of the teeth, and so you're rubbing off the enamel by chewing on this sugar cane, and then it's just putting sugar straight to like your teeth without the enamel. So it's very easy to like
chewers beware.
Eventually rot your teeth away. But it's really good. We would put it in the freezer and then shave it off, and then it was cold and it was nice.
That sounds very nice.
Yeah.
The desserts that I encountered, and maybe they're different in the Northeast, it was a lot of like flans and puddings and like liquid desserts and like jellos too. Like they'd have, and they do a sweetened condensed milk in a lot of things.
Sweetened condensed milk is like a general ingredient for any
It's like
dessert.
a base for most of their desserts. And there's one called brigadeiro, which is like a spherical fudge ball that they put sprinkles on.
Yeah.
And they have beijinho, which is a coconut one with a little bit of clove on it. And those are used at parties. And did you ever have that?
Yeah, beijinho I liked.
Beijinho is like sweetened condensed milk
with shaved coconut.
Yep.
And then they put just a clove in the top.
Yep.
Which is really more
so
just for
those are like staples
sugar.
at parties usually.
And then there's bem casado, which is going to be half of the chocolate fudge one with half of the coconut one.
Yeah, there you go. Well married is what that term is.
Bem casado.
And then they have maybe you can help me remember the name. Is it goiabada? Is that what they call the?
There's goiabada. Did you ever have surpresinha?
They'll do. I wonder. So they'll do some kind of cheese. I wish I could remember which kind of cheese.
It's Romeo and Juliet.
And they do. Oh yeah. So Romeo and Juliet is there's like a guava fruit jelly that's thick
It's a guava
on
fruit jelly
top of the cheese
with a requesón,
which sounds kind of weird, but it's
which is like a soft cream
good.
cheese on top, and
Right.
so it's cheese like savory with your really sweet guava jelly, and it was very good.
That was good.
And the guava jelly is very firm, like you can pick it up with your fingers,
Right.
and it's gonna hold.
Yeah, it's like a gummy type thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, then there's a lot of like peanut bars that they'll do, and they
Paçoquinha.
call them paçoquinha.
Yeah.
Which is like ground up peanuts.
Yeah.
It's like the inside of a Reese's peanut butter
Yeah,
cup. but
it
more
tastes
thick,
exactly like
right?
the inside. I actually made Reese's
And
peanut
those
butter
are
cups
so
in
good.
Brazil
Oh,
by
very cool.
slicing those and then melting
Very-
chocolate and making them.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's a sweetened pulverized peanut. One of the ones is surpresinha, which
Yeah, what
is
is
going to
that?
be a green grape wrapped in the consistency of a cooked.
Oh,
So it's like making a brigadeiro, which is just
yeah.
sweet condensed milk
That
with
was
chocolate.
weird to me. I
Except
remember.
this is no chocolate, so it's just sweet condensed milk that's been thickened on the stovetop, and then it makes a really sticky texture, and you wrap it around a green grape and then roll it in sugar. And it's actually kind of nice because it's called a little surprise, is what it's called. Because
Yeah.
when you bite it,
It's like,
you just
surprise! It's a grape.
get this, you just get this splash of grape in your mouth, and it's amazing. I really like it, but it's got that sweet.
Did you ever find somebody that made you tapioca?
Yes, I love
So
tapioca.
it's not pudding. So the tapioca is this this type of dough that's kind of
Yeah.
gristly, I guess you could describe it.
I can explain that if you want. Like
So
after when you're
it's
done.
just got
I'll explain that how that works.
I don't know how to describe it except it's like just gristly dough and it's white and they basically do it like we would do a scone. So you got like a flat pancake type thing and then they'll put sweetened condensed milk and like chocolate sauce in it or other things and you just fold it up and eat it.
Yeah, I'd say it almost eats like a taco
Yeah.
rather than anything else, but like a sweet
Yeah.
dessert taco.
But I got to describe like it's kind of hard to describe this dough. So it's kind of stretchy, it's kind of gooey and gristly.
So the way that you make that is you take tapioca starch, which people who are gluten-free are going to be very familiar with tapioca starch because it's a gluten-free starch that you can use rather than like cornstarch or anything like that. But what you do is you mix it with water to where it's semi-firm, and then you run it through on a like a wire sifter, and it basically splits up this semi structure because with the tapioca starch, I make it wet, I put it on a cheesecloth, squeeze out all the water to where it makes like this hard ball of starch, run it through a sieve, which then breaks it up and makes it kind of look like this little snow stuff, put a little bit of salt in it. So you've got this starchy mixed with it's a little salty. As soon as it goes on to heat though, it makes a crust, yet retains its stretchiness of like a starchy material. And so you get this tapioca starchy, stretchy tortilla almost. And then what we would do is we would put that queijo quality that we talked about that we would fry.
Yeah.
And so you get this little crusty cheese that's chewy, and then you put a little bit of sweetened condensed milk, and you put some fried bananas in there with some cinnamon, and then fold it up, and you've got like the most amazing little dessert taco you've ever seen in your life.
They were nice.
I love it.
And they're from a particular region. Do you remember?
If
only we had a Brazilian here.
I
tell us.
don't remember. I just know that we had it in our area up in the Northeast, and I know it's very, very popular.
Yeah.
In that area.
I think it was a northern thing.
Yeah.
And then, we almost finished talking about food without talking about coffee.
Yeah, coffee's
Like
very.
So Brazil, like I just learned today, they're the number one exporter of Brazil of coffee.
Really? Well, and they get like this.
I think they produce 30% of the coffee.
So
in the world.
one of the coffee strains, Arapiraca or Arabaica or something like that.
Yes.
It comes from Brazil.
Yeah, it's like Arabic, right? Arabaica.
Yeah, it's weird because it doesn't make sense.
Does not.
But the reason why it's so good is that high altitude coffees, which are usually grown in like the Middle East or Asian areas where you get some of your coffees, they're very high altitude and they can become very acidic. Whereas Brazilian ones have just the right temperature of humidity, temperature and humidity, and they're lower altitude, so you get a less acidic coffee bean, and their coffee is amazing. It's very good. I want to say like it's a very much preferred coffee over any other type of coffee. Because it doesn't have a very sour or acidic taste to it. It has a very full body. It's
very smooth
and
too.
Smooth. Yeah, it's very good. But it has to do with their humidity levels and the altitude that they're able to grow their coffee beans at. Yeah.
And it runs the whole country. Like having coffee in the house is just like having a faucet. Like
yeah, most people are going to have coffee.
And what's cool is they'll make a pitcher of coffee and they'll keep it in a sealed thermos style pitcher, and it's just always there. So you show up at somebody's house and they'll say, you want some coffee? And you don't say no. I mean, as a missionary you say no, but otherwise
I feel like
you're drinking
sometimes our perception of what is common in Brazil is different because we are seen as foreigners and visitors when we come, and Brazilians are very hospitable. Like, very hospitable. Hospitable. There we go.
Hospitável.
Very hospitable. And so, if they know that they're going to have a visit come over, they're going to have everything laid out for this person.
Right.
And especially when they think that person is a messenger from God. So, like,
double.
As a missionary, I remember at one point being like, you know what, it's so, like, I wish that we had meals like you guys. And what are you talking about? And I said, well, you guys have dessert with every meal. And they're like, we don't have dessert with every meal.
We get the guest treatment.
We give you dessert because you're special guests for us. And so we make a dessert as well. Because almost every time that we had a lunch and then they would bring out a dessert. I didn't even think about this fact being because we were the special guests. We got the special treatment.
That's true.
And so it's very possible that the coffee bean in the thermos was always made specifically for having a visit.
That could be. Because
like,
you're right. Like the lens that we viewed Brazil was through the lens of a.
Yeah. And it's a simple thing to throw on a pot of coffee. It's not like if someone said, hey, do you have any coffee? Like they're not going to throw it on. Everyone had coffee in their house, most likely.
Yeah, my point is like it's omnipresent. Like wherever you go, it's going to be there.
Yeah. It's very, very common in a Brazilian social area just to have coffee. And I think it's much more just a social thing than it is anything else. I think it becomes more just everyone has coffee, you drink your coffee, and that's just turns out how it is.
Yeah.
Like, I don't...
It's funny that
it becomes a vice where people are like, I need the coffee because...
It's just funny that we taught people... We taught people they had to stop drinking it, right?
Yeah, yeah. So as a missionary of the LDS or Mormon Church, we don't drink coffee. So we would tell people that they can't drink coffee anymore if they want to, like, really follow the church rules. And that's a big thing for them. A lot of them, I remember a lot of people that would be like, I can't go without drinking coffee, like. That's just such a common thing.
We'll work on like our like 12-step addiction program or whatever. We're gonna pray with you. Like we're gonna give you some scriptures to read, and then we're gonna pray, and then you're gonna. Not
I want to say for like the average American, who like will at least a few times a month probably get some form of fast food hamburger. It's like saying, well, we don't eat hamburgers anymore from fast food restaurants, so you're gonna have to not do that anymore. Like. That's the equivalent. I really think like that's almost the equivalent. It's like
because it's like part of their identity.
Yeah,
that goes back generations and every single person they know.
And one of the things that we had as far as like trying to help people with that is they had toasted barley, which it tasted very similar to coffee. It just didn't have like all the properties of coffee, mainly the caffeine.
Yeah.
So. And so they could make that, and that would taste similar to coffee. So we would give them a substitute coffee, which if you are aware of the brand called Pero, that's basically it's toasted.
Is it P-E-R-O-T?
P-E-R-O.
Oh.
Yeah. So Pero is like a toasted barley, and it. For whatever reason, when you like burn barley, it tastes just the same as coffee beans.
Yeah.
But it's very similar. You can mix it in with your drinks. It gives you that coffee flavor. But we would give people that to substitute their coffee addiction to make it with a toasted barley addiction.
Yeah, one for the other. Now we can talk music and dances here.
Yeah.
And I noticed, maybe I can name 5 or 6 genres that seemed pretty present. And from what I've seen, a lot of countries just listen to U.S. pop music.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong, but like when I would be walking around in grocery stores in Brazil, and like Avril Lavigne would be playing.
Yeah.
And Coldplay is pretty popular, and like Linkin Park and Imagine Dragons. So the top 50 chart here, plays in Brazil.
Yep.
But the music that's produced there, that I experienced, there's like bossa nova is big in the 80s. That was invented there.
Yeah, I love bossa
Right.
nova.
Very calming, and that gives me like I feel like I'm getting the authentic, like high class Brazil experience.
the
Like
feel
listening
of
to
Brazil.
bossa nova, it feels like
get the
I'm
culture
at
in
this nice resort with this lady in long white pants and a big hat and one of those long cigars, and you're just at a really nice hotel. Like that's what bossa nova feels like.
Saying long cigars are like one of those cigarettes.
The long
on, like,
cigar
the
sticks,
stems.
cigarette sticks. I mean,
Oh,
yeah,
like the,
you know what I
like,
mean.
smoother stick. Yeah.
That's what it feels
But,
like. And then
yeah,
you're gonna
seeing,
cruise along in a
you're seeing,
jalopy
like a really
into this just
white
nice,
sand beach
peaceful jungle.
with that blue ocean,
Yeah.
the sun, the heat, and you're just like everything's
Yeah, and it's
perfect.
like this is
that's
Brazil,
the feeling that bossa nova gives you.
right?
It's just this peaceful tropical vacation in music.
Yeah, and
Yep.
you're rich too. So
Yeah,
that's
and
what
you're
it-
not poor. That's definitely the
and
thing.
definitely so not poor.
You get-
And then there's forró. Well, this is more of a dance, right, than a genre, or maybe it's a little bit of
So
both.
forró does have its own music. Like it's its own music, and
And it, I'll do my best to describe it, but it's like your regular like guitar, drums, but also accordion, and it's.
Você vive dizendo que eu enchi demais você, enjoou da minha cara, não quer mais viver, tá de malas prontas, pensando em ir embora.
And people just kind of dance side by side, and it's a
accordion
little
is
bit of an
really
older
big.
generation type
The
thing.
accordion
But yeah,
is really big.
accordions and a lot. It's funny, and that's got to be the Italian influence. 'Cause, like there are a ton of Italian immigrants in Brazil,
well, and you know,
and
what's
I'm guessing they
funny?
brought a lot of accordions, right?
Well, what's funny is because what I was told about the history of
Yeah.
forró was it was actually like American soldiers during World War II
Oh,
that were stationed in Brazil.
yeah.
Like my grandpa actually was in Brazil during
Oh,
World
no
War
way.
II.
Wow.
And he was actually airplane photographer
Mm-hmm.
for beaches, and took some photographies of the beaches in Brazil, training for taking pictures of the beaches in Normandy. So, but it was actually little celebrations that the Americans would put on for the locals, and they would say it was for all. And so it was forró.
Dude,
And so that's where
could that be? Is that real?
that's what I heard when I was in Brazil. Like that's how
That's
everyone
cool.
told me where forró came from. And forró was like very big in the Northeast, and that's exactly where my grandpa was stationed in Brazil.
Yeah.
So it's these American soldiers and probably Allied soldiers just in general that would have this typical music. They would put on little concerts and shows, and they would all dance.
That's really
And
cool.
it became this thing that, for Brazilians, they don't really have that R sound. They have more of an H sound. So forró would be for all.
Oh,
And
that's
they don't
cool.
really have that L at the end of a thing either. So
Yeah.
it kind of came into this forró. And that's
Cool. So this is, I mean, would you describe it as just a folk music that
Yeah,
people dance?
It's an older
that's
type
meant
folk,
to
folk
do
style,
couples
like
dancing.
polka. It almost seems like a polka.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, it seems very similar to like a
Yeah.
polka.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's that one, and then Sertanejo was pretty big.
Sertanejo
and
is like
maybe
country
this-
music.
Maybe this was made bigger in the 90s. Maybe is when it came about.
80s, 90s.
80s,
time,
90s.
Yeah.
So Sertanejo is basically, generally you have like two vocalists, usually
Harmonizing.
like good-looking men
could be.
that
Could
that-
be, could not be.
that play the guitar or not.
Yeah.
and they usually have like a backup band, and it's the focus like this. It seems like this is a genre of music that's more focused on personality and like the prestige of the performer.
Yeah, so for me, Sertanejo was always country music. And it was very much acoustic guitar. It told more of a story than anything else in the music, and it was very
But they're also very
and
dramatic
melodic.
too. Like maybe it's just the ones that I've listened to. Like my go-to is I don't want to get the name wrong. It'll come to me.
Okay.
But the Sertanejo that I saw was like one to like really get the crowd into it.
Juízo sempre acaba e a nossa música vai começar. Paz e amor é o que eu quero pra nós e que nada nesse mundo cale a nossa voz.
Big sweeping
so there's
dramatic.
a difference in modern Sertanejo and classic Sertanejo.
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm referencing.
So classic Sertanejo is going to be more like our classic country, whereas modern Sertanejo is going to be more like the classic or the modern country, which becomes more into like a pop. It's more pop-like for like modern country. Country's that way as well in America. It's got more of a bit of a pop feature to it. Whereas if you get to like George Strait, like 1990s, 1980s country, like that's like real country music.
Okay, I just remember, it's Jorge and Mateus is like
Jorge
my go-to.
Mateus, yeah.
And they're definitely more modern.
Yep.
And so most of these Sertanejo bands are so-and-so and so-and-so. It's like
it's
usually the names of the two guys.
It's usually a double, you know, like a duet.
Yeah.
Where you've either got two women or two men or a man and a woman or maybe like a threesome or a quartet.
And I just remember seeing like so many posters and billboards of these Sertanejo groups.
That's
like,
funny.
They're a really big deal. I don't know if that's just the city that I was in.
That was very popular down there. Yeah. Because Sertanejo is very much like a northeastern type stuff. It's kind of almost like most of your country singers are going to be coming from like the western states or Texas or like Tennessee is very much your like country capital.
Right.
Like you're not going to see like a country singer coming from New York.
Right.
Like that's very rare to see. I would want to say.
Yeah, and that's
like
where I
your
was.
Area, you were in like kind of that big city area, so to see like that much country is kind of funny.
It was interesting. Yeah, I saw them everywhere.
É seu meu coração, não diga não precisa.
Eu já sonhei com a vida, agora vivo sonho.
Okay, and then
the other one.
Well, there's funk. Did you get a lot of funk where you were?
Yeah, so funk and brega was kind
of
like
and
the
this
same.
is just.
So
I mean, if you like it, great. But it is like just imagine the absolute worst, most annoying rap you can think of.
The interesting thing about this is that someone asked me on my mission, I was very new to the country, had no idea what funk was. They asked me, "Hey, do you like funk music?" And I'm thinking 1960s, 70s funk. And I'm like, yeah, I love that kind of music. Like, I love that. And they're like, you shouldn't like that. That's like the devil's music.
It's the music of sin.
And, you know, because funk it's rhythmic. And you don't need to be a good singer to sing it. Most of the singers that sing it have a horrible singing voice.
And I'm going to do my best impression here. And I'll probably find a clip. But the beat is usually... And then the vocalist goes, and that is literally what it is.
É a flauta envolvente que mexe com a mente de quem tá presente. As novinhas salientes fica loucona e se joga pra gente. Eu falei assim pra ela. Vai com o bumbum.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah, it's a lot of it is. You don't have to be a very good quality singer. You just need to have a beat, and the biggest thing is that you need to have women that are going to either be in thongs or very short shorts where the butts are showing.
It's the kind of music that's just like to get instant twerking going.
So like,
people grinding.
I really want to say that the
club.
twerking from funk is what started the like fad of twerking in America.
Very likely.
Like that is like because that was very big in Brazil before I even knew it was a thing in America.
Mm-hmm. So there's 4 genres off the top of my head.
Another one that was very typical, but it's very regional as well, is frevo. Frevo is very big in the Northeast, and I'm pretty sure it's like Recife is like the capital of frevo, which is it's like you've got your brass instruments, your accordions, very upbeat.
So
very
this
fast
sounds
beat.
like a stereotypical like Mexican band where there's like 15 members.
It does kind of sound a little bit like that.
Yeah.
You know, like something kind of like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of really animated dancing, really fast. Almost always they've got some type of umbrella that's green, blue, red,
Really?
yellow, and it's just like spinning like da 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 da.
That's
You know,
funny. I've never
and
seen that.
You'll have to find something for that.
That
But
is hilarious.
you know, it's very
And it's called
animated.
frevo?
Yeah, and it's a very
So it's very
animated,
performative, sounds like.
high energy dance and
Yeah.
music, and it's very I want to say that it's probably like Carnival. They're gonna have some of it in that area, but I think it's gonna be more related with São João, which is like a harvest festival, and it's very typical in the area that I was at up in the Northeast. But I loved frevo. Like that was like
That's funny. Yeah, that sounds fun.
yeah.
Well, and then there's like the gospel music.
Yeah,
that-
there's always gonna be like your evangelical music and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that seemed pretty popular.
Yeah, and then so you've got MPB, which is MPB, which is music popular in Brazil or popular Brazilian music. That's gonna be most of like your romantic
Well-
songs, like.
Well, we got to talk about Legião Urbana because they're like
Legião Urbana is a very, like almost.
like
a
they're
household
just
name.
very popular. Yeah.
I don't know what
and-
type of music they would have been known.
and it's-
like someone's gonna have.
Like
to
I
figure
think
that out.
maybe the best way to describe it is just singer-songwriter. You know, it's
Singer-songwriter, yeah. And he was kind of like a trailblazer in his music. One, he was gay. And I believe at the time Brazil was marked as a traitor of the country. And was actually banished from Brazil.
wow.
Because at the time I think they had a military-run regime for the government. They're very strict on censorship. He came out and spoke on a lot of things. Also, he was gay, which was against the law at the time.
Yeah.
Like he was marked as a traitor and kicked from the country, but very strong, leading the way type of artist.
It's funny because like thematically it sounds like punk, but the music is very like it's very calm music and it's very
but it's almost like a poetry in song.
That's right.
Like
Yeah.
it's not all the times does like the lyrics match up with what he's playing, but it's almost kind of like you've got this rhythm in being able to say what you want to say. And I think poetry and music is probably the best way to put
That's
it.
a good way to describe it, yeah.
Like they didn't always match up, but like for whatever reason they just kind of work together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked Legião.
You pick any average Brazilian on the street and they'll know about Legião Urbana.
Yeah.
Temos todo o tempo do mundo, todos os dias antes de dormir. Lembro, esqueço como foi o dia.
Yeah. And they've got rock and other things like that too. Standard rock, you got
Right.
Charlie Brown Jr.
Yeah, I was
Capital
going to say Charlie
Inicial,
Brown.
some rock type styles. You've got Hopa Nova, which is going to take almost any American song that played in the 60s and 70s and they're going to make a Brazilian version of it. Like, I remember playing one song for my aunt and my uncle when I came back from my mission, and they're like, that sounds a lot like this song by the band called Bread that played in the 70s.
Yeah, that's funny.
And I looked it up, and it was word for word the same lyrics. And that's another thing. You get a lot of word for word translations into Portuguese in popular music in Brazil. That's popular music in America, and for whatever reason, it just, since it gets changed into another language, people just seem to overlook any copyright infringement. Like it's very common to have a word for word translation in Brazilian music that's from an American popular song. Or maybe it's the other way around.
There's literature, which, and I don't think many people are going to be interested in that. I don't know anything about the literature.
Paulo Coelho is like a big writer.
Paulo Coelho is a big one, yeah. He's got some good quotes.
Yeah.
But like my experience there was like nearly every school of thought was from the paradigm of the Bible. Like the way that you interface with the world was through the lens of the Bible and what your pastor told you to think about.
Yeah, or it was always just a context of like books written just by other cultures. It was very much a what does everyone else say about this type idea.
Are you saying instead of looking at it yourself?
Like instead of having, and I can be completely wrong on this because there is probably a number of actual authentic Brazilian authors that do write stuff like this, but a lot of the things that I see come from foreign authors, just translated into Portuguese. So you've got a lot of like your school of thoughts and like questioning of beliefs and that kind of stuff just comes from either an American author or some European author that's been translated into Portuguese. You know, there seems to be very limited amounts of actual Brazilian authors that are doing that thinking out of the box part of things.
That could be.
Yeah, and I don't know.
Okay, sports. Obviously,
Soccer.
main sports, football, soccer. Like most of the rest of the world.
That's pretty much it. Obviously, they're up and coming in volleyball.
But they've got, so volleyball's pretty big.
Volleyball's really big.
Futsal and basketball a little bit.
Yeah.
But also, I learned like Formula One racing. They're actually really big there.
Well, yeah. So, like, I think anywhere outside the United States is going to be really big in Formula One racing because, like, everyone has some sort of racing following. We just made our own called NASCAR.
Yeah.
Like,
true.
NASCAR is Americans' Formula One racing. Except we just go in a circle. They actually have a really complex track.
It's a little more interesting. And then MMA, obviously, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is huge. Even in the United States, like MMA started out with, it was like you could have anyone fight any style. That's all it was. You would have people in there as karate. You'd have boxers. You'd have Jiu-Jitsus. And it's just come out that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of comes out
wins.
on top.
Yeah.
Like, because it's really big into the grappling factor of things. And I don't know exactly what it's based off of other than that there's some form of jiu-jitsu. Like, I really don't know that much about it.
Well, I looked up the I got a friend who could explain this so much better, but I learned the ideology of Brazilian jiu-jitsu is to redirect energy.
Right.
So when somebody's coming at you, you redirect their energy into the ground and you basically dismantle them.
Yeah.
Whereas like karate is about striking and blocking, and that's just not practical in the real world.
Well, it makes sense to
unless you're fighting another karate person in a tournament.
It makes
right?
sense to redirect energy because it's like if someone's coming at you, it's easier to push them just a couple inches off to the left,
use their force against them
and then follow them through with what they're already doing. Like it's easier to do that kind of stuff than anything else.
Yep.
Kind of like with sports and fighting styles and stuff like that, capoeira is a really big one. And I don't know how big that was down in the southern area.
Yeah, well, maybe because I saw people doing this, and I saw like little kids doing it.
Yeah.
And maybe you can expound on this, but my understanding of capoeira is it's half martial art and it's half a dance, but it's also mostly dance because they don't actually fight.
Right. So
it's like it's just like an expression to move your body around, just like a regular dance. But they're getting as close to kicking each other in the face as they can without doing it.
Right. So for people who don't know what capoeira is, most of the time it looks like a dance, but it also looks like a fight at the same time because you got two people who are doing like roundhouse kicks, but just going just in front of the other person's
and
face.
They're swinging their arms back and forth.
You're swinging your
arms,
you're moving, and there's actually like an instrument, and I'm wish I knew.
I'll look up the name of this instrument.
The instrument, and it's like a stick, and it's got like this gourd on the bottom, and it has a string that goes through it, and they're basically hitting this string.
Yeah, and they make the rhythm, and based on that rhythm is how they're dancing.
And you're moving your arms and your legs to this rhythm, and then as you're coming up to your opponent or who you're dancing with, you're basically kicking, you're throwing your arms in ways that looks like combat, but it's actually a dance. And as far as what I learned from like my area is that this was actually a tradition from the slaves. And the reason what it was a way for the slaves to train in combat, but then say that it was a cultural dance from their homeland. So they were able to like mix in some of these cultural songs and dances, and then throw out like athletic moves that were combat related, so that they could keep fit and be training in combat moves, yet not be in trouble with their owners in a way that they would be, because you weren't allowed to fight, because then it was like a way to like train and become better at like a revolution or something like that. So they could do these traditional dances, and then it was fighting, but you weren't actually making contact, so you said it was a cultural dance. So it was a way for the slaves to actually be able to train in combat.
That's cool. The instrument is called a berimbau.
Yeah, berimbau. Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, and I'll get some music in.
Yeah.
So we can hear what that sounds like.
But that was always very interesting to me. Was that capoeira?
When I first saw that, like I thought it was a martial art, like karate or something. And I'm like, and then when I see people doing it, like at the beach, I'm like, what is the point of this?
Yeah.
And the point of it is the same point as it is to dance.
Well,
you know, you're not really accomplishing anything by dancing.
And even the same thing as far as a competition.
But it's an enjoyable activity.
Like even
right?
if you think about fighting and that kind of stuff, it has that same there too. Like in a way, you're doing it to train. And it's a way you can train, and you train with a friend, and there's certain moves that you have to do. And so you're training as far as, you know, with your friend, just to see
how close you can get to kicking each other's face.
And you know, there's schools that teach capoeira, and I'm sure there's specific moves, because it's, as far as I understand, it's very similar to like karate, where you're getting different levels as you go up in it, being able to perform a certain move in a specific way and with the right timing and that kind of stuff. So it's actually I would say that it is a martial art in a way, but it's not like a contact force martial art.
Yeah, contactless. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah, let's just wrap it up with like social customs compared to the U.S. And like I think one of the first things people notice is how warm and friendly the people are in Brazil. Yeah. At least compared to the U.S. So we might have touched on this, on how, you know, we would talk to people on the street and they would let us in their house within a half hour, right? Or less.
You just talk to them, say you're talking about Jesus, and they're like, sure, come in.
Right? And they'd offer you meals, like they'd offer you food just out of nowhere. And I experienced just like genuine kindness that didn't expect anything in return.
Yeah. And so I feel like a lot of it is, if you were to look back 60 to 70 years into our culture, it was very similar. If you were to show up at someone's house on the street, they would invite you in. They'd probably have a little cake made, just specifically a cake made in
for
the
visitors,
cake.
right?
For visitors. You know, they'd always have something ready for someone to come in as a visit, and they would provide you with either tea or coffee and some cake. You know, it's almost like they're about 60 or 70 years behind where we're at in our social structure. Yeah. You know, and it comes that way as well, as far as like gender roles and that kind of stuff. It's very much a
well, the word they use is machista.
Machista, I know.
That's in English, like in English, it could be misogynist, but it's not. It's more like I guess you say male-centric.
Yeah, I think that's misogynistic. You know, very patriarchy, as far as
patriarchal, like, you could say, yeah.
Patriarchal society, and so you have some of these things that are are different to us for today, but if you were to look back into our history, it would be very similar.
Not that different, huh? Yeah, I wonder if that's just a trend towards modernization in like city size.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I was in small towns and big cities both.
Yeah.
And the big city areas felt more, I guess, Americanized. Like, in my mind, it seemed more Americanized.
Cool. It was a little less warm. You weren't always like.
Certainly,
the one thing is like hugging in Brazil is a big thing. When you meet someone, you're giving them a hug. You know, you're not just like, "Hey, how are you?" or maybe a shake in the hand.
Yeah,
it's a very close contact type social structure.
Right, much more physical, and also the emotions in general are just more exaggerated. So when somebody is sad, they're really sad, and despite how patriarchal it is or male centric, it's much more normal for men to cry, and it's not seen as. You don't think maybe this was the areas I was in.
Where I was at, it was very
like the men were very emotional. They would cry and they would like shout for joy. You know.
I would say that where I was at, it was very misogynistic in the way that men don't cry. If a man cries, he's weak. You know, it was very much a man needs to be strong and you know, thick-skinned to be able to be a man. Obviously, I think part of our perception is talking more about the people that we had religious contact with, whereas like there's a difference between men who are going to be maybe softer or closer to religion, that are going to be closer to being able to let their emotions show, whereas like in general, I see very much men don't cry. Men are thick-skinned. They're strong, you know, and that's how they're supposed to be, and that's how they kind of live their lives in that way. You know, it's not going to be letting a lot of emotion show. It's going to be very strict and how that kind of goes. That's how I see a typical Brazilian man being. Whereas outside of the setting of teaching them about God and Jesus and Holy Spirit and that kind of stuff, whereas that is almost a spot where I think most cultures, when it talks about religion, it's almost an acceptable point to allow yourself to be emotional. Yeah. So I think there's a bit of a lens, I think, as far as missionary standpoint in our view of what that was at.
Yeah, there's a similarity between Utah or U.S. culture where, and maybe most of the world is like this, where we can think of our dads or grandpas or uncles or whatever that are pretty emotionally temperate, I guess you could say. But when they're giving a blessing or like saying a prayer, that's when they get emotional. When they can be emotional. So it's like religion opens up this one little crack where it's like men are.
It's okay for a man to cry.
It's okay for just this one particular part, right?
Yeah. If a man cries during a religious ceremony, it means he's closer to God and he's a better person. Like that's the only time that like crying as a man is going to be acceptable.
Yeah, it's funny how there's just a switch of social capital there.
Yep.
Is what it has to do with. Like, you lose social capital if you cry.
Yeah, however, when you're at home with your wife and you're trying to discuss an issue, there's no way that you could ever let emotion show. It's like you have to be the strong fist man.
That's funny.
You know, so there's definitely in the social structure of at least the area that I was in, a very much patriarchal rule. Whereas, and it's going back 60, 70 years from where we were at.
You're right.
Where it was, you know what, the woman does exactly what the man says. He rules the house. Women keeps up the house. He makes the money. And you do what he asks you to do. And you make him happy, and that's where it's at. And if you don't make him happy, he's free to do whatever he wants to do, and there's nothing you can say about it.
Yeah.
Like, that's... At least from where I was at, that's very much the standpoint, unless you've got a very progressive, modern, forward-looking man, which is going to be very hard to find.
Yeah.
You've got a very stereotypical patriarchal society.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you saw any of these same patterns, or just maybe if you noticed the emotionality of some of the companions you had. So like in the mission that we were on, you'd sometimes switch companions every 6 weeks or so.
Yeah, a month and a half to 3 months, yeah.
Because a lot of the Brazilians that I knew were like generally more emotional. And this is neither good nor bad. It's just like when they were like excited, they were really excited. And when they were like bummed out, they were really bummed out.
Yeah, I would say that, like, as far as like my perspective goes, generally your I want to say your general Brazilian, whether woman or male, is going to be more emotionally led than logically led. Meaning, and this even holds up towards crime in Brazil. You've got men who will literally get in a serious confrontation based on a simple hurt of pride. So there's a large amount of emotional anger that can happen, or emotional sadness that can happen, that can cause people to go beyond their logical wits. So like they can come back afterwards and be like, I have no idea why I did that, but they were just so caught up in the rage of the moment that they do these crazy things that you would never really expect to be. So it's almost a very emotionally led people, as far as emotions rule all, and logic comes in after the fact. So a lot of times I think you'll see it'll be a very common pattern for like a man to abuse his wife, or physically abuse or beat his wife, and then come back later and say, oh, I'm so sorry about that. Like the logic part comes in after the emotions have gone, and to apologize for that, but then to usually rely on emotion as far as decision making rather than logic. Like that's what I've always witnessed, and that's in my area that I've been in, which is the northeastern area of Brazil. But that's the way I've seen it.
Well, then last thing we can touch on is like popular culture of like some of the celebrities that we know of in the U.S.
Yeah.
And first one that comes to mind for me is Adriana Lima.
Or Anitta. Anita's
a big one.
Yeah.
She's kind of like the Beyonce of Brazil.
Secret model.
She is, yep.
And Gisele
And there's Gisele Bündchen.
Yeah, she's
and
married
they're
to
from
Tom
the South.
Brady.
Yep.
Yep. So very
so
big
there's two
popular
supermodels,
Brazilians
Anitta.
in America. Anitta is very big in Brazil. She's huge in Brazil.
She's like the
I think
Beyonce
she's
of
starting
Brazil.
to show up a little bit in more Latin America and Latin type culture, song and dance, because a lot of her music has a very Latin beat to it.
Prepara que agora é a hora do show das poderosas que descem e rebolam, afrontam as fogosas, só as que incomodam, expulsam as invejosas que ficam de cara quando toca. Prepara, se não tá mais à vontade, sai por onde entrei. Quando começa a dançar.
She's actually a good segue of what we were just talking about. And I was thinking of these celebrities that go really extreme in their presentation, like the way that like Nicki Minaj and Lady Gaga go really extreme with these with their outfits and their music videos. And Anita's kind of doing the same thing, where she will wear like as little clothing as legally possible. Or like some videos she's just wearing tape.
It's
right?
very sensualized.
And why she does this, she's not doing this just to ruffle feathers. She's doing it because of exactly what we were talking about, how it's such a male-centric culture in so many areas. And it's like, you're going to be this extreme in the in your patriarchal like structure. I'm going to go completely extreme in the other direction, saying I'm going to do whatever I want to do as a woman.
Well, and she's got inner way. So this is going to be kind of my opinion about certain things. Obviously, it's not going to be, you can't search this. It's not going to be something you can find out. Like, this is my opinion.
Yeah.
But she's a very smart business person. She came into this to look for, this is Anitta that we're talking about. Anitta. Singer, Brazilian singer. And she came into it with a very business-like mind structure. And to be honest, there's more male Brazilians than there are female Brazilians. Wait, I'm wrong on that one. Sorry.
Yeah. I looked this up. 0.95 to 1. We'll cut that.
We'll cut that.
Cut that out.
You know, but she's coming into a very patriarchal society.
Right.
And so there's a form of the way that men look at women in that society, and it's very objective. So if she can be this scandalous person, she gets a huge amount of following because men want to see that. She also gets a following from the women because it's a woman doing whatever she wants.
It's empowerment too.
And so like
she's playing
in the
both
same
sides.
way, she's playing both sides, and she
and
gets
this is like a page out of the Kardashian playbook too.
Yeah,
like
and she's done a lot of extra collaboration with one, I think, kind of starting, and we'd have to really do a lot of investigation on Anitta, but like
sure,
Mexican song artists are very popular in America. Brazilians are not. So she's done collaborations with
Snoop Dogg,
like some Brazilian or with some Mexican. I'm not sure if she's done anything with like Daddy Yankee or anything like that.
Oh,
like Daddy Yankee's like a very big like club presence for like Latin like clubs and that kind of stuff, which introduces her into an American culture. And it's very common for Brazilians to listen to American singers. Not very common the other way around. Americans to listen to Brazilian singers. And she's gotten her way in to being in the American mainstream a little bit. That's like unheard of for Brazilian singers.
Yeah, that's true.
And so she's gotten her way. She found out where Americans did listen to externally, which is Mexico, and got herself in with that crowd, and then was able to get in with like the Latino crowd in America, and in a way like kind of move it. Like she's very smart in the way that she's done it. Whether you like the scandalous part of it or not,
right? Yeah.
Like she's done a very good job for herself.
Agreed.
But to be honest, like those three women are like the top like Brazilian people that I can think of in America. Like
yeah, we should know more.
Like obviously
people that invented things too.
Well,
help me remember. I like the name Santos Dumont. I was just gonna say that Santos Dumont. I've heard it, and he. Ooh, I hope I get this right.
Is allegedly.
So Wright brothers created a glider. We might make a lot of Americans angry. The Wright brothers created a glider, and Santos Dumont.
I'm going to say...
Put the engine on the glider.
No. So the difference is the Americans made, so the Wright brothers made an aeroplane.
Okay. But it glided,
Santos
right?
Dumont
it wasn't powered by an engine?
Had the first powered flight.
There you go.
He used a...
So I was right.
He used a balloon and an engine. They used planes or like wings and an engine.
Yeah.
So most of the time you'll have Brazilians that will say Santos Dumont was the first person who had flight, like powered flight, which he was. I'll say that. Like he flew around the Eiffel Tower. He was a French citizen or something like that. Lived in Brazil. Like he was a French national that lived in Brazil or something like that.
That's adorable, flying around the Eiffel Tower.
And so like he flew his blimp with a propeller on it around the Eiffel Tower. This was before the Wright brothers. Wright brothers created the airplane, which had wings and used aerodynamics and the propeller to move forward. And so we always say that like the Wright brothers are the fathers of flight, or like they had first flight, where technically Santos Dumont had a blimp with a propeller on it and flew first, yet it is not using the same aerodynamic laws to fly. He was using lighter than air balloons to lift and then a propeller to propel. Whereas Wright brothers are using aerodynamics of drag and lift and from the wings and the propellers to actually cause lift to fly.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. But he was in, I think, Rio. Rio de Janeiro is where he was kind of raised at. Because one, I want to say that because I was just in the Rio International Airport and there was monuments everywhere for him.
Oh, cool.
So,
yeah, so he's a big deal. Man, do we know anybody else that invented something?
I don't know. I'm sure there's more inventors. We don't know.
Oh man. Dang. Well, we're almost at 3 hours. Is it almost 1?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
That's 4 hours.
That's pretty good. Okay, that is a wrap. If you made it all the way to the end, parabéns, congratulations. I hope that was insightful and fun, as it was for you, as it was for me and Chase. Recording this really made me realize how much I miss Brazil. Thanks for listening, and until next time, benção e fique com Deus.
Larga tudo e vem correndo, vem matar minha vontade. Já faz tempo que eu tô sofrendo, mereço um pouco de felicidade. Larga tudo e vem correndo, pra eu mergulhar no teu sorriso, me arrancar desse inferno e leva pro seu paraíso. Eu não desisto do que eu quero, mas não me desespero. Te espero na tarde quente ou madrugada fria, na tristeza ou na alegria.